This is a story about cover-up culture. It's a story about betrayal. It illustrates a need not just for reform, but reforms that we truly embrace when we find ourselves under scrutiny. We have to ask, what happens when the person who writes the rules for church accountability gets accused and then refuses to follow those very rules? This video is about Patricia King, one of the most well-known figures in the charismatic Christian world. She's built a global ministry and she's been trusted and respected. And she's one of 7 authors, along with me, of the Kingdom Accountability Project, a detailed, serious framework for how churches and ministries should handle allegations of abuse. It is easy for all of us to get behind a document that is focused on protecting God's lambs, but the test comes when you yourself are implicated. Earlier this year, serious allegations surfaced, not against Patricia herself initially, but against her husband, Ron Cocking. Many of Patricia's supporters don't know that name. She changed her last name to King years ago, but Ron Cocking, who recently passed, was her husband. And according to Kat, who has known Patricia and Ron since she was 16 and loved them like parents, Ron Cocking sexually assaulted her in their home when Kat was in her early 20s.
Ron, he sat next to me and he touched me very inappropriately and in a very sexual way, and I completely froze.
Kat says at the time, Patricia's response was to blame Kat, to blame her bikini. After Kat's testimony became public, Patricia released a public statement with a completely different narrative.
I was informed of an inappropriate boundary violation, including my husband and this woman. The disclosure I received at that time did not describe sexual assault as that term is commonly understood today.
No investigation, no independent oversight, no witnesses consulted. Just a denial. The CAP document, the one that Patricia helped write, explicitly forbids that. The accused does not issue public denials, but allows the process to speak for them. What no one knew was that someone in Australia was listening to Kat's testimony on Heaven Bent, Daniel. And he remembered Kat. More tragically, he also remembered that he had been sexually abused by a minister who was growing close to Patricia in the early 2000s. And he says that Patricia knew about the abuse and did not stop the predator. And he seems to have receipts. Daniel never imagined that he would have to revisit his story, and certainly not publicly. But when he saw how Kat was being treated, he knew he had to speak out. After Daniel's moving interview with Heaven Bent, I contacted Patricia's board and urged them to follow the document and conduct a proper investigation. A few days later, they issued a statement, not to their mailing list, but to Heaven Bent's Tara Jean Stevens, claiming to undertake a thorough review. After an agonizingly slow process, where getting information was like pulling teeth, I got a phone call. They were done, and there would be no public statement. There would be no disclosure of their findings. They would ignore calls for accountability and transparency, believing that silence would best protect their ministry. 3 out of their 5 board members had endorsed the CAP document, but when push came to shove, CAP became inconvenient. Those same 3 people are on the PKM payroll, at least in the latest available 990. And it appears that several of these same board members may also be involved together in a multi-level marketing business that many medical professionals, independent science reviewers, and consumer watchdogs consider a scam, creating yet another layer of shared financial interests that should have disqualified them from conducting this investigation in the first place. Amazingly, Patricia still has a dedicated page on her website to the CAP document. This isn't just a story about one ministry. It's about cover-up culture, where leaders are learning that silence is a better strategy than transparency. That if you just say nothing long enough, it'll go away. Well, it won't, not today. Hey everybody, this is a video that I did not plan on making, or I didn't want to make. I had hoped that it would be handled in a different way. So there were allegations, and we're going to get more into this later, but I want to give you a brief outline of what we're going to be doing today. There were allegations made against Patricia King, and they were not handled in a proper way. According to a document that I had a part in writing and Patricia had a part in writing, where it gives very clear guidelines on how to handle an allegation that comes against a ministry or a minister. Because of that, I reached out to Patricia's board, and they gave me every indication that they were going to deal with these in a more proper way, and yet then they didn't. They sent word back to me through an intermediary that they would have no public comment on these allegations, violating the Kingdom Accountability Project, a document that both Patricia and myself had a role in writing. Their general attitude to the body of Christ is, we don't owe you an answer. Keep supporting us, keep supporting the ministry, but we don't owe you an answer. And this is a strategy that I've been told by a reliable source is one that more and more charismatic ministries are going to take when they are implicated. The idea is that if we're forthright, it's not going to go well with us. But if we're just quiet, if we're just silent, if we just keep going forward, then that will be the best strategy. And you know what? They're probably right, but it's not honest. And just because it may work doesn't mean that it has God's stamp of approval. And that's where you come in, the body of believers. They're going to stonewall you unless you demand better. You don't have to support financially a ministry that is not willing to be transparent. Okay, so let me give you an outline of what we're going to do in this video. First, I want to give you a little background information regarding the Kingdom Accountability Project. Secondly, I want to look into the allegations against Patricia that come from two individuals that were aligned closely with her ministry in the late 90s, early 2000s. We'll hear directly from both Kat and Daniel. And then we're going to look at what I believe are severe conflicts of interest inside of Patricia King Ministries, which would disqualify her board members from doing this investigation, even more so from saying we're not going to have any comment about it. Then we're going to come back to the Kingdom Accountability Project, and I'm going to show specifically what is written, what Patricia wrote, or at least endorsed. She was one of 6 authors, and how they broke it in adjudicating this situation. And then lastly, I'm going to give my verdict based on the evidence that we have. Now, to be clear, I'm not a judge. I'm not a jury. This is because they won't do it. This is because they are basically, I don't know how better to say it than this, they're giving the middle finger to the body of Christ by saying, we have nothing to say. How can you write a document that demands transparency? In fact, I know for a fact that one of the reasons that Patricia was asked to be involved was because John Kelly, who is the leader of the International Coalition of Apostolic Leaders, saw her speak on accountability. They had a conversation, and he was so impressed, he wanted her to be a part of it. So how can you now say, nah, we're not going to do it? Just a few months ago, Patricia King posted on X that she wanted people to read the Kingdom Accountability Act. And many people read it, and many people were quite alarmed by it. I was one of those who were alarmed. But before I share with you how I responded, I just want to talk to you about my relationship with Patricia. It began 7 years ago in 2019 when I sent an open letter to Rick Joyner because he was not adequately or righteously dealing with the sexual sins of Todd Bentley. And I felt like people were at risk. A young man named Stephen Powell had tried to arrange a meeting with Rick, but he wouldn't meet with him. So finally, Stephen posted what he knew online. And then the next day, Rick made a video attacking him. That's what I responded to. Patricia got a hold of me that day. I'd never met her before, but she wanted to encourage me. She thanked me, and we became friends. We didn't become ministry partners. We come from 2 different wings, I think, of the charismatic world, but I did appreciate her advocacy for the victims of Todd Bentley, and there was a good result from that. He was declared unfit for ministry. Obviously, anybody who can gather a crowd can stay in ministry, but officially, a group of elders declared him unfit because of his sexual sin. I stayed in touch with Patricia on and off throughout the years, and about a year ago, when she acted in a strange way regarding another issue of clergy sexual abuse, where it appeared that she was, in the corner of the abuser, I was really surprised. So I emailed her, and I got no response. So I emailed her again because I had quite a bit of information on the situation, and I knew if she would listen to me, she might see it from a different point of view. But again, she did not respond. So when I saw the Kingdom Accountability Act that was being promoted by her, I didn't go to her. I went to the managing editor of the document, Mark Pfeiffer. And I wrote Mark a 7,000 word critique. Critique is a nice word. It was pretty strong. But to Mark's credit, he responded with just 2 words. And about, 2 hours after I sent it, he's a quick reader, but he responded with 2 words and he just said, fair critique. And so that led to a lot of dialogue. Within a week, we scheduled a Zoom meeting that lasted 3 hours, and he was really listening. He really wanted to get this issue right. There were a lot of things I was concerned about. First of all, I did not feel that it adequately protected victims that were coming forward. I recommended that we have something called a TIA, a trauma-informed advocate, that every alleged victim would have somebody in their corner that would be provided for the church if they didn't have one themselves. And that person really, their job would be to protect the survivor in coming forward. I felt it was too harsh on social media, that it didn't understand that many of the people, if not all of the people who've brought their allegations to social media, it's because the church failed them. It's because the eldership that they approach did not follow 1 Timothy 5. Constantly, I'm hearing stories of survivors coming forward and being stonewalled by eldership. I just heard recently about an alleged victim who was threatened with a lawsuit by her abuser and the massive megachurch behind him. I don't know all the details in that, but that's not abnormal. So the people who go to social media, most of the time, they're not people that are comfortable in the spotlight, unlike the famous preacher they might be accusing, who is super articulate, who does have a massive platform. So I expressed those concerns to Mark, and Mark was listening. And so we worked together, and I was able to rewrite major sections of the Kingdom Accountability Act to the point that I was comfortable putting my name on it. At the same time, Patricia was one of the authors. She took her name off of it, and if I understand correctly, it was because of some of her associations, such as Todd White, people who were not being accountable. She understood that unless the people that she was relating to, ministerial friendships, were willing to embrace the Kingdom Accountability Project, there was going to be pushback against her. So she asked for her name to be removed. Mine was added. And to be honest, I was pretty pleased with the document. It's not a perfect document, but I think it's the best we have right now. When it initially came out, there were several initial endorsers. There was an executive committee, and then there were the authors. And one of the concerns I had was that people would put their names on the document, but then not follow what was in the document. This happens quite a bit where years ago, I was a part of what was called a prophetic integrity. I think that's what we called it, a document where we all signed our names. And I know that some of the people who put their name on that document to look as if they were embracing prophetic integrity do not embrace prophetic integrity. And so my concern was that people that were signing the Kingdom Accountability Project, if they were implicated, they would not follow it. And sure enough, that is the case. For instance, Cheon, he became one of the initial endorsers. And since that time, he has come under quite a bit of scrutiny. First of all, because it appears that he covered up for Shawn Bolz. He knew that Shawn Bolz was a sexual predator, and he knew that he was a liar and faking prophecy since 2020, when he heard firsthand testimony from a survivor. Che then got up on a stage and said that he's never covered up anyone's sin. He said it quite passionately.
I've never covered up for anyone's sins. By the way, you know that I could give you a scripture verse for that. That's an abomination before the Lord if you cover up someone's sins.
And it was just after that that his former sister-in-law came to me. We did an interview, and she shared how Che, again, this is her narrative, that Che expected her to stay married to his brother-in-law, even though it was a violently abusive situation. Pia Hugo says that Che even told her that God might be calling her to be a martyr, to be killed by her husband, I guess for the glory of God, and that she would get rewards in heaven. There's the Melanson family that also came forward to me, and we did an interview. When their son was 6 years old, he was molested in Che's church by someone, and it came out when he was 10 years old. And the family was pretty much told, do not talk about this in the church. Now, your congregational family, that I mean, where else are you going to find healing if it's not with your brothers and sisters? But they were pressured not to speak about it in the congregation. And when they couldn't agree to that, they were not only kicked out of the congregation, but they were fired from their jobs. Both Mr. and Mrs. Melanson worked for the church. They lost their home congregation and they were fired. And when I brought that up to Che, he said, well, I'm going to reach out to them myself because I love them. We love the Melanson family and we're going to reach out to them. That was March 1st. And we are now getting close to June. And the Melanson family, whom he loves so much, has not been reached out by the would-be governor. My concern here is that Che was eager, I assume, to put his name on the Kingdom Accountability Project, but now he's not willing to be accountable. And I don't want to go into the whole story, but he told his congregation that they were going to get through it together, that he was going to pastor them through it after he talked to me.
But I do want to say that after we do pursue this, it's interesting, I'm going to be preaching, not next Sunday, but on the 15th. And I just want to give an update, Lord willing, based on the meetings I have this week and with Lord willing, with Sue and I, with Ron Cantor, because we want to pastor you through all this because it impacts the body of Christ.
And then he never brought it up again. And then there's Jeremiah Johnson, who's lost, I think, 80% of his church over the last few months because of massive allegations. In fact, I don't know that I've ever seen one minister come under so many firsthand allegations regarding plagiarism, regarding lying, regarding manipulation, spiritual abuse, separating people in his congregation from their parents, claiming that he prophesied something that he didn't prophesy. The list doesn't end. In fact, it continued just last week where he posted something that was posted by somebody else just a few hours earlier. It looked like copy paste, but he was claiming that it was coming from him. So my concern, Jeremiah was part of the executive committee. Che was part of the initial endorser group, and Patricia was one of the initial authors. And none of them, in the midst of their own scandals, are actually following the document, in my opinion. So how did we get here? In late January, Tara Jean Stevens, who is the host of the Heaven Bent podcast, interviewed Kat. Kat is from Germany, and she was very close to Patricia and her. I'm going to put the links in the show notes, in the description, to all the different media that we're going to talk about. And I would encourage you, because I'm not going to take the time to play every testimony and everything that's been aired in the past few months in this, or we would have another Mike Winger-ish 6-hour video. I'm trying to keep this a bit shorter, but I would encourage you to go listen to the firsthand testimony of Kat and the firsthand testimony of Daniel. I'm going to talk about him in just a few minutes. But first, let's listen to what Kat said she endured a couple decades ago.
I don't remember the exact date, but out of the blue, one evening in the hot tub, it was me in the hot tub and Ron and the two girls that lived in the house with us, and the jets were running, and all of a sudden, Ron, he sat next to me and he touched me very inappropriately and in a very sexual way. And I completely froze because he also, like, he did it in a way that nobody could see, like the other two girls couldn't see it. And something in my brain like completely shattered because I really loved Ron. He was like a dad. He is 30 years older than me, and I couldn't really compute it in my brain what was going on. So I remember getting out of that hot tub and I was completely confused. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know like really who to talk to or what to do. And so I don't know how I got through the next day, but I went back in the hot tub because I thought, yeah, that must have just been an accident. That must have been, yeah, can't be right. Like maybe I don't remember something right. And it happened again, and I froze again, and I yeah.
That was Kat with Blaze and Christina Foray on their podcast. But here she is initially with Tara Jean on Heaven Bent.
And soon after 911, it must have been like the end of September, things took a sharp turn. We were in the hot tub one evening. I remember it was me and Ron right next to me, and then the two girls from Washington State. I forget their names. I do not remember their names, but all the jets were on, and all of a sudden I felt a hand in my private area. Yeah, going under my bikini pants, and that was Ron. And I just totally froze. I, yeah, I, I mean, I grew up with the whole no sex before marriage, and I didn't have many ideas about it. I was a total Christian nerd, you have to imagine, that didn't know much about any kind of sexual thing. So there was his hand, and he was fingering me, and um, in a way that I think nobody noticed because the bubbles were going and the jets were on, and I was just sitting there frozen, and my world was shattered. Like I felt like this is like I couldn't really place it. I had no idea what actually happened to me there. And then the next night it happened again. And that kind of really destroyed me. Like I was like, okay, maybe it was just an accident, maybe I don't know, but then it happened again and I was like, no way. This is wrong. I just froze. I just completely froze.
And I was shocked because she completely blamed it on me. She said it was my fault because I was wearing a bikini. And I remember that she also had written up a letter and where she stated like what the problem was and that it was my fault for the bikini, that I was not allowed to like that I have to leave. I have to leave immediately and I'm not allowed to contact her or Ron or her sons for 2 years. And yeah, and I was super shocked. I was super shocked because I loved them. They were like family. And the moment she did that, my whole future like broke, like crashed on me because I didn't know what to do all of a sudden. Like, technically, I was supposed to be in the war room for like 6 months. And technically, I thought I would go on work for our ministry maybe. And like, I had all those awesome prophetic words on my life back then. Oh, you're going to be a leader in your generation. And like, you're going to like, yeah, I wanted to be like Pat. I wanted to go and preach the gospel and go and help people and all those things. And I was shocked because the way I thought the Bible says to handle those things was the total opposite of how they got handled. And I didn't expect that. I did not expect that at all um, from her. And it really broke me.
Tara Jean of the Heaven Bent podcast reached out to Patricia for comment, and this is where she aired, at least according to the document that we wrote together. According to the Kingdom Accountability Project, such a situation should go immediately to your board, and it should be your board that speaks for you. You should not defend yourself. Again, we'll take a deeper look at the document later. Right now, I want to analyze her response. I'm not going to play the whole thing. If you would like to listen to it, the link is below. But there are a couple things I want to highlight, and then I want to hear directly from Kat herself.
I have been made aware of allegations being raised publicly regarding events that occurred approximately 25 years ago, involving a woman who briefly volunteered with my ministry at that time and was living in our home along with other staff and volunteers. My husband was not a leader in our ministry, was not on staff, and did not hold spiritual authority within the organization. Nevertheless, the situation was addressed seriously with accountability and pastoral oversight.
Okay, so a couple things jump out as strange. First of all, she refers to Kat as a young woman who volunteered briefly. That seems like she's trying to minimize the relationship. If you hear Kat, and by the way, I'm only involved in this because of my relationship now with Kat, with Daniel. They have asked me to advocate for him. I went to Patricia's board because they asked me to do that. I was serving them and I continue to serve them. And we're going to continue to use our platform that God has given us to give a voice to those who don't have a voice. But the idea of Kat just being this nameless, faceless young woman who is in and out does not seem to line up with reality. Certainly, it doesn't line up with Kat's testimony. Let's listen to Kat.
First time I met Pat and Ron was in 95 when I was 16. I remember being super proud of myself that I got to translate for her when I was 16 when she preached in my church, because I remember the situation so clearly. It's funny how that happens sometimes, that the normal translator that we used to have, she was gone the day that Pat was supposed to preach. And I asked my pastor, I was like, who's going to translate for her? And he's like, you're going to. And I'm like, what? Really? You think I can do this? And he's like, yes, I absolutely do. And so I translated her sermon in my church at 16. And I remember both Pat and Ron, they took a liking to me. She was always really impressed with me. Like I said, I had many prophecies. Anyways, 95 is when I met them. I was 16. And then they invited me to come and live with them right after high school. That was in 98. And so I came and lived with them for 3 months. Worked for her ministry, copied tapes and manuals with Ron. Traveled with them. Was on the prayer team. Things like that. That was in 98. In 99, I spent 3 months in Canada again. I didn't spend the whole time with them. I think that's when they moved to Kelowna. But I spent some time with them and some time with one of her best friends. I think in 2000, I didn't see them in Canada. I saw them in Germany. She came to Germany to speak at a conference, and I just traveled there to hang out with them. But then it turned out that the translation, the simultaneous translation in the box for German to English, was not great. They didn't really understand what was going on. And so I ended up translating at that conference. And then she also requested me to translate her on stage at that conference. And then in 2001, again, she invited me for the war room. I didn't even have to pay for the war room. I think, yeah, I'm fairly sure. She invited me to come and do that and live with them. And so I went in July of 2001 to be with the war room. And then 911 happened, which was crazy. And then the assault happened. So at the time the assault happened, I had known them for 6 years. They were like family because my family was such a mess, and they were like my extra family that really felt like a wholesome family to me that brought a lot of healing until then. And my plan was to stay in Canada, to live in Canada. I really loved Canada. Yeah.
So that sounds like a real relationship. She's translating for her. She's honored to translate for her. She's invited by them to live with them, invited by them to be in the war room, which is their big prayer ministry. This is over a 6-year period. So it would appear that Patricia is intentionally trying to minimize. She volunteered for us briefly. And another question I would ask, if the board would have interacted with me, but they would not, I would send emails. I would wait a week, 2 weeks, and get one-line answers that were not satisfactory. They clearly were trying to give the impression we're engaging without actually engaging. But a big question that I would have had was this. In Patricia's statement, which again, the link is below, you can hear the whole thing. She says that her husband and Kat, they mutually crossed lines, that they mutually began a emotional connection with each other that wasn't holy. And my question is this: how does that happen with a young woman that only briefly works with your ministry? That is not plausible. It is not plausible that if we're going to take that narrative, which I don't believe, I believe Kat, I believe she was assaulted in the hot tub. She is believable and she has nothing to gain here. By the way, that's one of the things I'm always asking myself in these situations: who has something to lose, who has something to gain? In this situation, Kat has a lot to lose by coming forward, because she has to listen to people online say that they don't believe her. She sees the machine not taking her seriously, come against her. It's excruciating for her, and she has nothing to gain. There's no lawsuit. She's not suing Patricia. And on the other hand, Patricia has a lot to lose. She has everything to lose if it comes out that, again, Patricia didn't do anything to Kat initially. That was allegedly her husband, Ron. But according to Kat, Patricia blamed her, said it was because of what she was wearing, the bikini. But it is not plausible that she was just this person that showed up briefly, young woman, can't remember her name. I don't believe that. And I believe there's probably testimony from others who can share that she was. What about Patricia's assistant at the time, Ruth Ripley? What does she have to say about the young woman who briefly worked? What was it really brief, or should we believe Kat was at 6 years? We know that Daniel says that he encountered Kat there when he was in Kelowna. I'm sure a proper investigation will find people to come forth that will either confirm we hardly knew this what's her name young woman, or that yes, that was Kat. She was in and out over a 6-year period. I would like to know in their investigation what the board found out, but they won't tell me. Good morning. It is another day. It is actually still dark outside. But I want to continue to speak about Kat's story. Just 2 more issues very, very quickly. The first thing has to do with the whole idea that Ron was not part of the ministry, was not on staff. He didn't have a leadership position. I'm not buying that. What I'm saying is this: that seems like a clear effort to say that there was no power differential between a man in his 40s and a girl with no real sexual experience in her early 20s. She looks at Ron like a father figure. She loved him like a father. She loved Ron and Patricia like parents. So I don't think that we can say with a straight face that there was not a power differential between them. He's a grown man. She is a woman coming into adulthood. I think the effort here is to make you think that these were 2 adults who made a decision. They crossed a line that we don't fully understand what that line was, but they did it together. They did it as equals. I can't buy that. Ron is the husband of Patricia King. They are a team. The 2 shall become one. To think that people coming into that ministry just see Ron as normal as everybody else. They don't see him as the husband of Patricia. They don't see him as somebody of carrying at least some authority. And again, she says over and over again, she loved Ron and Patricia like parents. They had that type of authority and power in her life. And we can't forget that Kat is living in Ron's house. He is the head of the house in which she's living. There was an obvious power differential. So even if we buy the idea that it was mutual, that the 2 of them decided to cross this boundary together, Ron is the one with power, not Kat. And in those situations, more than often, we find out that the younger one has been manipulated. The one under power may even think it was their decision, but they've been manipulated. Of course, in this situation, Kat isn't saying that. She's not saying that, I found myself in love. She's not saying that at all. She's saying he was like a father, not a boyfriend. And she's saying that he physically crossed the line with his hand in the hot tub. There's one more thing, and that is the testimony of Michael from Germany, who also spent time with Ron and Patricia in Kelowna. And this is significant because the title of the first episode of the Heaven Bent series was Blame the Bikini. Kat's contention is that she was blamed because she wore a bikini. And this is the whole idea that men cannot control themselves when women aren't dressed properly. And Michael has a particular incident with Ron Cocking that takes place as they're driving around town. Let's listen to Michael.
There's one incident that I immediately remembered when I listened to the podcast and to Heaven Bent and Kat's story. There's one memory that immediately came back, which was a little bit weird back then and now perfectly makes sense. And that was we were driving around in his Dodge and having some ice cream or doing something. And then are at this gas station, and Kelowna was very warm at the time, so it's a semi-desert place. And there were some young people, girls in short summer dresses, and Ron looked at them and turned to me, and then Sandy said this weird thing. He said, "Look at these girls. They dress like prostitutes, and then they wonder when they get raped," or something along those lines. It may not be the correct wording, and that's one thing I remember. So at the time, it felt weird, but looking back now, it just means that he had internalized this idea that the victim is to blame as well. It's not just the perpetrator, it's also the victim who is partly to blame or is also responsible.
This echoes a mentality that many saw in the viral clip from Pastor Bobby Leonard, where he said that women who are dressed improperly deserve to get raped.
I used to say this. I haven't said this in a long time. You ready? I said, if you dress like that and you get raped and I'm on the jury, he's going to go free. You don't like it, do you? I'm right, though. I can't help you don't like it. I'm right. Because, a man's a man. A man's a man.
My first impression as a 16-year-old of Matthew while praying for me was that he seemed very gentle, very sensitive to my concerns or what I was wanting prayer for. He was someone who flowed in the Holy Spirit, and he would listen to God, and he would pray, and he would share his words of knowledge. He came across as a very in-tune person with God. He also came across as very charismatic, very likable, an attractive personality. He was an attractive man. And he came across as someone who had spiritual authority. It became clear to me that Matthew was very interested in me as a person. I revealed to him in that prayer line that I was struggling with same-sex attraction and that I was seeking for prayer. I was seeking prayer to overcome what I saw at the time as a sinful and problematic behavior that I needed healing from. And he was very kind and understanding, and he showed a lot of what I saw as God's compassion and care and kindness to me.
Patricia came to Perth, Australia, where Daniel lived in 2000. And Daniel could see that Patricia was very much drawn to Matthew, to the supposed anointing on his life.
I would say she was particularly drawn to Matthew. She responded to the apparent power of God on his life. It was almost like a kindred spirit, and she really liked Matthew from what I could see. They seemed to bond spiritually, and they bounced off each other in the spirit and in the prophetic. And I think that fondness grew over the course of the conference and beyond the conference. Sometime after the tent of meeting, my mum had been approached by someone, I think it was in New Day, who had warned her about Matthew and said that their son had been approached by Matthew, and they believed that he had attempted to groom their son. And my mum was obviously very concerned, and she became much less drawn to him and was very wary of Matthew. And she, as I understand it, she contacted the pastor's wife of the church and shared her concerns. I understand it was more than once. She was very concerned and relayed those concerns and asked that that Matthew be kept away from me because of her concerns. After raising her concerns with the pastor's wife of this church, my mum spoke to me and she pleaded with me to stop being around Matthew. She said there's been concerns brought to her attention about his behavior and that he might be quite a dangerous person to stay involved with. And that absolutely terrified me. I remember not long after my mum telling me this, I was in a service at the church and I was trying to avoid Matthew. He quickly picked up on this and approached me. I was very uncomfortable. And he asked me, what's happening? Why are you acting like this? And I was reluctant to say anything. I tried to say nothing at all. And he insisted. And by this point, you know, he had considerable sway over me and I felt afraid of him. But I was quickly assured by multiple people that he was a man of God and that he was trustworthy and I had nothing to worry about. And many people really sung his praises. And so I was confident that he was a safe person. From that moment, I basically went all in with regard to my relationship with Matthew. I, as a young 17-year-old, decided that the word of these people in the church, one of which was a senior leader, was true and that I could trust them.
When Daniel says he went all in with Matthew, here's what that looked like. After he graduated high school, Matthew convinced him to enroll in the same Bible college as him. A few months later, he also convinced him to drop out and leave town without paying his tuition. And suddenly, Daniel had become his follower. Over time, there were a few others who followed Matthew too, as he began filling up a schedule of tent revival meetings, and Daniel carried on with him, meeting after meeting, eventually cutting off his family entirely. He actually mentioned a really disturbing story to me about the time his mom was trying to get a message to him while they were staying in a small town in New South Wales. And she manages to get this teddy bear to him. And Matthew made him ceremoniously pull off its head. And still, Daniel stayed.
He would regularly use flattery and would build me up to make me feel good about myself. He would extract information and secrets out of me that I would not have normally told people. And then he would respond in a way that made me feel very comfortable with him knowing that, and that I wasn't at fault and I wasn't to be judged, and that I was loved and truly secure and even admired for being honest about these things. He would then use that information to exercise authority in my life, spiritual authority, by speaking into these areas and claiming that God was saying certain things and what God would do with me and how he would heal me and how he would use me. And he would make me feel like I had hope and there was a future and I could really trust this man and trust God to deliver on these things. And so by isolating me from friends and family and by obtaining many secrets while also exercising spiritual authority over me, he primed me to then sexually and spiritually abuse me. The first time he abused me, I remember going back to his apartment. He invited me over and he offered me alcohol. He said, I don't know if you've had alcohol before, but, let's have some. He gave me ouzo from memory, a very strong spirit. And I was excited to try alcohol and I had no understanding of his intentions. And I drank it. I got tipsy quite quickly. But I vividly remember what took place next. So he asked me to come into his room and he said he was going to pray for me and that he wanted to pray for healing from homosexuality for me. So he started praying for me. I was standing up and he was in front of me. And at one point, he put his hand on my genitals and he said, this is what I'm feeling the Lord is asking me to do. And I felt that was very odd, but I also didn't want to question it. It made me feel uncomfortable, but I thought, well, he knows what he's doing. And he kept praying for me, speaking in tongues and praying. And then he said to me, you need to take your clothes off now. I was quite shocked by this, but at the same time, I'd had a couple of ouzos and I guess I was feeling relaxed. And I also thought, well, I can't question this. He knows what he's doing. There was a moment of complete confusion.
Having met with many survivors, I can tell you that this confusion is a cognitive dissonance where you literally feel crazy because on the one hand, you're saying, this is a man of God. I trust him. He cares for me. He loves me. He would never do anything to harm me. And at the same time, what's happening is wrong. And so there is, as Daniel describes it, complete confusion. Dr. David Poehler says that someone in this position will often feel like they are actually going insane.
But also, I had no reference point to resist it. And I was also under the influence of some alcohol. So I undressed and basically he undressed himself and before long he had me on the bed and he was doing things with me. And keep in mind that I had not long before turned 17. So I was still underage in Australia. The legal age for consent is usually 18, but certainly someone who was in a position of trust and power over me, the consent age was 18. These are examples of what was hundreds of instances where he initiated sex with me, where he got me drunk, where he used prayer and spiritual practice and combined it with sexual perverted acts. And that occurred over a few years. I've come to realize since that using spiritual practices to pervert sexual acts caused significant harm and damage to me psychologically. I don't recall that it was a warning of some sort of severity of danger that I was in, but rather more a focus on to stop the temptation or to remove us from the vicinity of each other would help. Well, there'd be a physical boundary, so there could be no sexual contact.
Matthew would then go to Kelowna to be with Patricia King's ministry, to be part of her war room, and he raised funds in order to bring Daniel there as well. Daniel's aunt, who happened to be in Kelowna at the same time, because she was also a big fan of Patricia King and was instrumental in bringing her to Australia. She tries to go to Patricia to explain that Matthew Ford is in fact a predator and that she believes that he is sexually abusing her nephew Daniel. However, Patricia's assistant comes back to the aunt, and according to the aunt, says that Patricia does not believe the reports. And in fact, Matthew was allowed to go to the airport several hours away and to pick up Daniel. He took him to a hotel and he sexually abused him immediately. Not long after that, it seems that people began to realize that there was a very unhealthy relationship between this man in his mid-20s and a young man who had just turned 18 years old, and they decide to separate the two. Matt remains in the war room, and Daniel is sent to a place called Jesus School. Here's what is troubling. How did they not recognize that this was a grooming situation? Certainly they knew that Matthew had known this 18-year-old for some time. The aunt says that she gave her testimony that Matt was dangerous, and yet they kept him in the war room. All they did was separate the two of them.
But there was no encouragement to report abuse. There was no acknowledgement that there was an abusive situation happening. And I was not encouraged to go to the police. There was no real protection and encouragement to report anything. I think it's worth reiterating here that while I was in Kelowna and Kamloops, I was still 18 years old and very young, and Matthew was 6 or 7 years older than me, and he operated in a way that he assumed spiritual authority and prophetic authority. And I think for a lot of people that I knew, it was clear that he appeared and was much older than I was. And the not questioning about the nature of our sexual relationship, knowing that I was only 18 and that I had not long before been underage, was also a point worth noting and something that was of concern to me in hindsight. Matthew exhibited classic grooming behavior as far as I understand it. Looking back now, it surprises me that that wasn't something that was of concern to Patricia or her team at that time. There were signs in my view that the relationship between Matthew and I, the sexual relationship, wasn't just two friends. It wasn't just an issue of sin between two friends, which is what seemed to be how it was handled by Patricia. Firstly, there was an obvious age difference. I was only 18. Matthew was 6 or 7 years older than me at the time. And Matthew operated with an assumed level of authority that I think a lot of people, in my understanding, saw and either acknowledged or didn't. But he, in many ways, acted older than he was. He was also my spiritual authority, effectively. And he had brought me out to Kelowna. He had raised money to get me out there. There was no clear understanding of why I was going there or what I would be doing. I was not going into the war room. There were obvious signs that something wasn't right.
We mentioned earlier that Daniel's aunt tried to warn Patricia and her team regarding Matthew Ford. What's interesting is that Daniel never knew this. It's only in the past couple months, decades later, that his aunt shared with him how she tried to warn them.
And so then my auntie proceeded to tell me about her trip to Kelowna in July 2001. She had gone over for about 5 weeks to undertake what was called the School of the Spirit. And Pat had mentioned this during the tentative meeting and sent out a broader invite. In fact, my auntie told me that unintentionally she ended up being on the same flight from Australia to Canada as Matthew. She had very strong concerns about Matthew, but didn't have the ability to talk to Patricia as she was being ostracized effectively in that situation. One vivid memory that my auntie did share with me was just before the School of the Spirit, there was a conference apparently, and there were some well-regarded big names in the prophetic movement, including Bob Jones, Heidi Baker, and Stacey and Wesley Campbell. So she remembers Matthew moving among the hierarchy, so to speak, and being free to really platform himself, I suppose, as this up and coming prophet, as he saw himself. My auntie also remembers that while she felt strongly that she was being really kept at a distance from Patricia when she arrived in Kelowna, Matthew, on the other hand, was really being encouraged to be very involved, including in meetings, and that he even baptized some of the attendees at some of these meetings. So my auntie said that she, at some point while she was in Kelowna, decided she would talk with one of Patricia's assistants because Patricia just wouldn't speak with her. So she spoke to this assistant and she basically said, look, Matthew is a predator, and that she believed that he had groomed and violated her nephew, which is me. Now, my auntie got the impression that this assistant was very concerned and that she would talk with Patricia. And she did. But much to my auntie's deep disappointment and sadness, the assistant came back to my auntie and said that Patricia had basically discounted everything that had been presented to her. And all the while, Patricia didn't attempt to address this directly at all with my auntie. It's actually quite devastating, really, to think about the fact that Patricia had a warning from my auntie the month before I arrived, and still I was abused in Canada, and still Matthew was allowed to continue in the war room. But I did try to speak up in my own way. I did write to Patricia. I warned someone that I knew I could tell about him still being in ministry.
So this is the confidential testimony of Daniel's aunt. She's given me permission to share it with you. She starts off by just talking about how she met Matt and how she met Patricia. She had come to Australia to minister, but let's go down here and start. This is after Patricia and Ron are in Australia. They're ministering at a place called the Tent of Meeting. I recall that at one stage during the Tent of Meeting, Matthew, that's Matt Ford, came forward for prayer. And Ron Cocking, that's Patricia's husband. At some point, Patricia changed her name from Cocking to King. And that whole history is in the Heaven Bent podcast. Ron Cocking stepped in to pray with him. Ron drew me aside later with concerns about Matthew, saying that something wasn't right here. And so, according to Daniel's aunt, Ron Cocking, Patricia's husband, who was interestingly praying for Daniel, because the other testimony we heard is that Ron had no place in the ministry, yet he is with Patricia in Australia and he's up front praying for people. So that would say that even if not on paper, didn't have a role, official, he's clearly a part of the ministry. She's saying that Ron was bothered by Matthew, that, quote, something wasn't right. Over the course of the conference, continuing to read, I became increasingly concerned about Matthew's behavior and felt he was not a safe friend for Daniel, her nephew. Now we're going to skip ahead. She goes to, this is maybe a year later, she goes to Kelowna in Canada to be part of an event, the School of the Spirit, run by Patricia King. Okay, let's move down. And she flies to Kelowna. In July 2001, I flew to Vancouver with my two sons to attend the School of the Spirit in Kelowna, which was run by Patricia King. We were in Kelowna for 4 or 5 weeks. Having missed our flight, we ended up on the same flight as Matthew to Canada, and were by chance seated right near each other. Our interactions were very stilted because of the stand I had taken with him before the tentative meeting the year before. She had let it be known that she was concerned about him, and Matthew was aware of that. I recall that at Vancouver Airport, Matthew drew one of my sons to him in a way I will never forget. He started to climb all over him, and I could not get my son away from him. This scared me because I knew what he had done to Daniel. I saw the way he mesmerized my son, the power he was exercising over him. It seemed like a takeover, and I couldn't stop him. In that brief encounter, I could see how he managed to hijack my nephew's heart and mind. I had never seen anything like that before. It was like he was under a spell. And if you think that she's overreacting, we have Daniel's testimony that he was under Matt Ford's spell. Matthew displayed predatory behavior, and he never gained access to my boys again. When I arrived in Kelowna, it seemed to me that Patricia distanced herself immediately and would not speak to me. I believe that Matthew stayed in contact with Patricia after the tentative meeting, the time when they were in Australia ministering, and think he may have sought to influence her views on me. Prior to the School of the Spirit, I attended a conference in Kelowna. I recall Bob Jones, Heidi Baker, and Stacy and Wesley Campbell in attendance. I noticed that Matthew was moving among the hierarchy, and it seemed to me he was promoting himself to them. Later, Patricia's assistant, Ruth Ripley, invited us to Patricia's 50th birthday. It was a big birthday celebration. I recall Matthew again positioning himself so that he could be at the center of the proceedings, mixing with the VIP guest. I also remember Matthew being encouraged to take part in several meetings and even baptizing some of the attendees. Meanwhile, I heard from others that Matthew had been telling them he was a pastor of a church in Perth, which was a lie. One evening, I was invited to Patricia and Ron Cocking's house for dinner. Again, Patricia Cocking is Patricia King. However, Patricia wasn't there. Ron and Ruth were our host. Ruth shared how Matthew had been over the night before, and Patricia and Matthew went to heaven together. I say this to highlight the relationship that I witnessed that was developing between them. So let me address this for a moment. I believe Patricia has this idea that you can go to heaven, you can travel to heaven. It is not my experience. I have never been to heaven. I have never seen an angel. Like I said at the beginning, we're both charismatic, but she's from a different wing than I'm from. So there are a couple things here that really concern me. I'll call them red flags. Number one, when Paul goes to heaven, he writes about it in the third person. That's how embarrassed he is about it. He doesn't come back bragging about it. He doesn't write a book about it. He doesn't go on, a program and say, I went to heaven and let me tell you how things are. He doesn't build his ministry on this experience as so many do today. And that is why I question a lot of these experiences, that either they are fake or they're demonic. I don't know. But we seem to get the idea from Paul's testimony that such a visitation was not frequent and considered quite holy. He said that I experienced inexpressible things that no man can talk about. But here's the other issue. If Patricia and Matt were together alone praying, that itself is a red flag. but he's a homosexual. He is a groomer. He is a evil human being inflicting incredible abuse on Daniel. How in the world could they go to heaven and nobody clues people up in heaven? Patricia, I mean, could they have gone to a real place, a heavenly place, and nobody up there, not the angels, not Jesus, nobody could say, hey, Patricia, this guy you're hanging out with, he is an evil person. He doesn't belong up here. So there's something that just doesn't sit right in my spirit with this whole idea that the two of them went to heaven together. I don't know what they did together. I don't know where they went, but if it was legitimately a heavenly experience, I think somebody would include Patricia in on the fact that Matt Ford was a homosexual abuser and groomer. Let's go back to the letter. So Dion is concerned about how close Patricia and Matt Ford were and that she was not picking up on the fact that he was not a good guy. He was an evil guy. Upon arrival, we were allocated prayer partners. The first week, a young woman came and sat with me who shared that she had been given Matthew as her partner and was troubled by something she had heard from the Lord. She had heard a voice that he was a wolf in sheep's clothing. The young woman shared this with Patricia, who removed her as a partner from Matthew. Now, let me say, I don't know who that woman was, but that would be a third witness now that has come to Patricia with severe reservations regarding Matthew. And let's not forget the fourth, her husband, Ron. Ron prayed for him and then said to the aunt, something's not right with this guy. I believe that Patricia discounted this as coming from me. In other words, it seems that possibly Matt Ford had turned Patricia against the aunt, saying for whatever reason, she has something against me. And you know what? I don't know. I can't ask Patricia these questions. I hope her board asked her these questions. But again, the only reason we're doing this video right now is because her board said, no, we are not going to address these issues in any public way. We're not going to draw attention to these allegations. We're not going to deal with them seriously. And if you don't like it, tough. Let's continue. At some point, I approached Ruth, this is the assistant, after a session of the School in the Spirit. I told her that I was convinced Matthew had befriended my nephew to sexually violate him. So the aunt is saying I told Patricia's assistant that I was concerned about this. I shared how I believed that he had done this before, and I had seen him target other men at the conference. At the time of telling her, Ruth gave me the impression she believed me, and she said that she would discuss it with Patricia. Ruth remarked how one man, who was referenced as the, quote, Jesus man, because of his long hair, had appeared more withdrawn since arriving at the conference in Kelowna, and that he may have been targeted by Matthew. Later, she got back to me and said that Patricia had discounted all that I told her. Patricia did not attempt to address the issue directly with me, as I hoped she would. And in my opinion, Matthew should have been removed, directly pending further inquiry. I wanted to see him taken from the sphere of influence he was enjoying on the back of lies and deceit so they could seek out further information to qualify what I had told them. But this did not happen. I left Kelowna discouraged, saddened, and damaged. I did not speak to Patricia again until years later at a conference in Australia. The last time I saw Patricia was at a conference in Mandurah, south of Perth, in about 2010 or 11. I approached her after the service and she seemed hesitant to speak with me. To break the ice, I asked how her husband Ron was, and she shared that he had been diagnosed with a degenerative condition. I was hopeful at this point that she might acknowledge and validate the information I provided to Ruth regarding Matthew in 2001. I felt as betrayed by her response then as I did in 2001. And what we're going to find out now and read is that Patricia got emails detailing the homosexual relationship in 2008. So even if we are to believe that Patricia did not know anything about this in 2000 or 2001 when everything was going on in Kelowna, even though her husband is bothered by Matthew, the aunt is giving testimony that Matthew is a wolf in sheep's clothing. Another woman who's his prayer partner has a word that he's a wolf in sheep's clothing. And we have the testimony of Daniel that her and Matt were brought into this room and they understood that they were having what they felt probably was a consensual homosexual relationship. Even if we say none of that happened, in 2008, Daniel reaches out to Patricia. And Patricia knows that in 2010 or 11 when the aunt approaches her, but she still does not acknowledge what happened to Daniel. Let's look at those emails. So this email it says to redacted, but it would be Ruth Ripley, the assistant for Patricia King at the time. So he's asking her, please forward to Patricia King, confidential. I'm writing to you regarding a matter that I feel is of particular concern. You may remember me from a number of years back when you visited Perth, Australia for the Tent of Meeting conference in 2000. I was a friend of Matthew Ford's and came to Kelowna, British Columbia, Canada in 2001, following Matthew's trip to Canada and his internship in the War Room. I've recently discovered that he has become actively involved in Christian ministry in Brisbane, Australia, as a full-time pastor. I would like to confirm whether or not you are aware of his ministry and if you are supportive of it. I am deeply concerned about his status as a pastor, considering the unresolved sexual and emotional abuse I was subjected to under his leadership. I hope he's been restored to Christ, but I am doubtful that this is the case. I have not been in contact with him since mid-2000. It's my understanding that after they came back from Canada, Matt continued to abuse Daniel. And let me also say that it is obviously not plausible anymore to say that Patricia did not know of Matt's ways. It's in this email. Ruth knows it. Patricia knows it. We have not heard back from her board. By the way, it was these emails coupled with Daniel's story that pushed me to reach out to her board and say that this is not a nothing burger. This is a real thing. I am aware that you may have had no contact at all with Matthew since he completed the War Room School in Kelowna. I would also like to thank you for your love and kindness that you showed me following this abuse coming to light back in 2001. I have not since had the chance to thank you. Now, let's stop for a moment. That is an interesting way that he ends the letter there. He wants to thank Patricia. I want to thank you that you got in and you helped me. You put me in they put him in this other school, I think called the Jesus School. He at that time looked at Patricia as somebody who helped him because he was in this horribly, even if she did not classify it abusive, she stepped in and separated him from Matt because it was a homosexual relationship. And they're in a Christian ministry environment. And he's thanking her because it wasn't until just this January or February that his aunt told him, I told them back in 2000, 2001, I told them that Matt was a predator and they didn't believe me. I told Patricia and she discounted it and Matt continued to abuse. So obviously now Daniel's understanding of Patricia and the way that she handled things back in 2001 are a little bit different than his thankful attitude here in this first email in 2008. But there's more here because he says these words, I also want to thank you for your love and kindness that you showed me following this abuse coming to light. So Daniel's understanding back in 2001 is that his abuse came to light. It was discovered. It was understood by Patricia and the leadership there. That's why they acted. That's why they separated him and Matt. So the idea that they didn't know and that they didn't even classify it as abuse needs to be questioned now because Daniel is saying that his understanding in real time was that his abuse came to light and they acted, but they didn't act enough because they kept Matt in the war room and they never exposed his ways back in Australia. And they did not protect Daniel going forward, nor did they minister him as a survivor of clergy sexual abuse. He did not get the therapy or ministry that he needed back then. But again, Daniel's understanding in 2001 is that his abuse came to light in front of Patricia. Let's look at the second email. I'm sorry, not the second email, but the second post I have, which is the end of the first email. Thank you also for the support you showed me following my father's death and my need to return home to Perth after you generously offered and paid for my enrollment in the Jesus School College in Kamloops. I had hoped to email you directly, but had no direct address. Regards, Daniel. So now Ruth is getting back to Daniel. Hi, Daniel. I don't know if you remember me, but I live in Kelowna and knew you and Matt. I spoke with Patricia and she asked that I let you know. I spoke to Patricia about what you wrote me. And what did he write? He wrote about the sexual abuse that he was subjected to at the hands of Matt Ford. Ruth says, I spoke to Patricia about that. This is 2008, nearly 20 years ago, which means either Ruth is a horrible liar and needs to be confronted, or she did tell Patricia about the email and what was written in the email. Now, I don't know Ruth Ripley, but I am going to believe that she's not a liar, that she's a good assistant, I guess, unless she was giving Patricia plausible deniability, but I don't think that that's the case. I think that she would want Patricia to know about what Daniel had suffered. Yet in the statement released to Heaven Bent by Patricia's board, they claim that she knew nothing of it. All these years, somebody's lying. That she nor any of us have had any communication with Matt for years. So we just trust that God has done a major healing in him and that God has brought him all the way through into victory. So they obviously know that Matt is a homosexual. What victory could they possibly be talking about? Now, they don't see him as a predator. They just see that, okay, we were warned about him. We discounted it. But in the end, it turns out that Matt was a homosexual. There are people who come to the Lord and they have same-sex attraction and they deal with that as believers. But that's not what's going on here. Matt is a predator. He is pretending to be a minister. He is pretending to be one thing while he is using his position of power to prey on young men. Well, we know at least Daniel, but more than likely others. But it's very clear that in 2008, they knew, and that's Patricia and Ruth, that Matt was a homosexual. And not just that, they knew that he was an abuser because he says, let's go back to the first email. If you look down here in this third paragraph, I'm deeply concerned about his status as a pastor, considering the unresolved sexual and emotional abuse that I was subjected to under his leadership. Now, they don't respond going, oh my gosh, Daniel, what, abuse? Trauma, sexual, what, unresolved? Let's talk. Let's meet. Patricia is allegedly a champion for victims of abuse, but there doesn't seem any shock, any surprise. And if they were shocked or surprised, they certainly didn't do anything to help Daniel. Let's continue. So again, the response is that not we need to stop a predator. They now have information that Matt is a homosexual predator, that he is targeting young men. He certainly targeted, they know now that he targeted Daniel, and there is a concern that he is still doing this in Australia, but they're not concerned. They're just thinking, well, we hope that he's healed now. And I have to say this, I've been involved in ministry for almost 40 years, and in my experience with ministering to people who've come out of a same-sex or homosexual lifestyle, you don't just suddenly, all those urges and desires, they don't just suddenly disappear. There are testimonies of that, but in most cases, it is still a struggle and a temptation. But again, we are not talking about somebody struggling with same-sex attraction. We are talking about somebody who is a wolf, who is using the guise of ministry to inflict damage on the souls of young men by manipulating them into homosexual sex. And there is no outrage. There is no concern from Ruth or from Patricia. And if there is more to this story, we will never know about it because her board has said, we got nothing to say. We're not going to address this. And friends, that is unacceptable. But we're not done. Let's go to the next slide. So here we have the final email to Ruth, and she responds. So Daniel writes, hi, Ruth. Thanks for getting back to me and passing on the message from Patricia. I didn't think Matthew had continued contact with the team in Kelowna, but I wanted to be sure. It appears that he has again become a self-appointed minister and is involving himself in youth ministry. I remain deeply concerned for those involved with him, as the material posted on his ministry website strongly suggests his behavior has not changed. I doubt that he will try and contact Patricia or yourself, but wanted to let you know that what was happening in the event that he does. Daniel is concerned. He is, and let me just be clear, Daniel today is no longer a believer. He is no longer identifying as part of the evangelical world. Yet here he is in 2008 with more concern for victims of abuse than Patricia King. Patricia has long marketed herself as a friend of survivors. That is her brand, and yet there is no real concern from her camp over the actions of Matt Ford. But here is a victim saying, I don't want this to happen to another young man. I'm worried. And you guys have power to do so. That's what he's crying out for. And they're like, well, thanks, Daniel. We'll pray. That's her final. Look at the bottom there. Thanks, Daniel. We'll pray. We're going to pray, and we're going to hope that Matt is no longer, that he's gotten healed. We're going to believe he's gotten healed, even though the evidence would suggest that people in those positions who are groomers and they haven't been caught and they haven't been exposed and they haven't been stopped and they haven't gone through any real repentance and deliverance, the evidence is they don't stop. And you certainly would never put somebody like that back in youth ministry. So in 2008, they should have done something. They should have sounded the alarm. It is very clear that they know and they knew what Matthew did to Daniel, and they did nothing to stop him, and they did nothing to let the people in Australia that Matt was ministering with know that he was a predator. And if they did anything, we don't know about it because they will not respond to these allegations. This strongly suggests that Patricia and her camp have something to hide. Why would you not bring Ruth Ripley out to speak on her own behalf? Why would Patricia not publicly address these emails? And just to be clear, her board did address this statement. Now, why did her board address it? Because on March 16th, when this came out, I wrote to her board and I said, it is your responsibility. It's my understanding that they wouldn't have said anything, but they were beginning to feel the pressure that they, had, as a board, had a responsibility to speak out. It doesn't appear to me that they spoke out of conviction, certainly based on the way they're handling things now, but they spoke out, in my opinion, because of pressure. And I'm going to play for you Tara Jean Stevens reading their statement. They sent it to her, and to be clear, they didn't send it to you. They did not send it to me. They did not put it on Facebook. They did not send it to their constituents. They sent it to an unbeliever who has a podcast that reaches people who have been hurt within the evangelical or prophetic or charismatic world. They did not want you to see it. They simply wanted to do something to say, yeah, we did something, but they didn't do it with full transparency. If you want to do something with full transparency, you don't merely send a statement to a podcast. You go on your own platforms and you say, we want to address these things head on with full transparency, with full disclosure, not in the darkness, but in the daylight.
Okay, this is Heaven Bent. I'm Tara Jean Stevens. This is season 10, episode 6, and it's going to be a really brief episode in order to share an important development. It's a response from the board of Patricia King Ministries to episode 5, A Safe Person. That episode was released exactly a week ago as I'm recording this. Neil came forward to share a heartbreaking story that was really difficult to hear. And I'll share the statement now, but I don't ever want to let it slip away from us that Daniel was really clear that part of the drive about coming forward is to support Kat. She's been sharing her own story publicly since the start of February now. And although their situations are obviously different, they're both painting a picture of a leader who didn't or couldn't identify or care for them as victims. Now, here's the statement from the board. I'm going to read it for us here. It's dated March 20th, 2026. We are deeply grieved by the account shared by Daniel on the Heaven Bent podcast, March 16, 2026. That's the day it came out. Regarding his stated experience of alleged abuse connected to Matthew Ford. Our hearts go out to him with great compassion and to all who have suffered in similar ways. We recognize the courage it takes to speak up about such painful experiences, and we honor that courage. As a ministry, we stand firmly against all forms of abuse, grooming, and exploitation. These actions are a violation of God's heart and is designed for human dignity and safety. In his story, Daniel expressed a belief that Patricia was aware of the alleged behavior at the time he visited Matthew in 2001. Patricia, it says, has shared that she does not recall knowing about the abuse during that season, but she carries deep sorrow for Daniel as she reflects with sobriety on what has now been brought forward. It doesn't go on too much longer, but the end part says, we are prayerfully and carefully reviewing the circumstances, seeking truth and clarity with humility, integrity, and compassion. We're committed not only to accountability, but also to creating environments that are safe, honoring, and Christ-centered. We ask for your prayers, for wisdom, for truth, for healing, and for the peace of Christ to guard every heart affected. With sincerity and care, the Board of Directors, Patricia King Ministries. Okay, that's the statement. One thing I will definitely be watching out for over the coming days and weeks is, does this board follow their own advice? Do they follow the guidelines that are mapped out in the Kingdom Accountability document for how to handle alleged leader misconduct? CAP, the Kingdom Accountability Project document, is what we learned about on episode 3 with its co-author, Ron Cantor. So, yeah, still more to come.
Did you hear that? Or maybe I should ask, did you not hear that? What they're saying, or I should say what they're not saying, is nothing about the 2008 emails. They're denying that they knew anything back in 2000, when the aunt claims adamantly that she got word through Ruth Ripley to Patricia on more than one occasion, and Patricia discounted the allegations. But they said nothing about the 2008 emails. Why not just say, yes, in 2008, we got those emails, and we were shocked to find out that Matt was abusing Daniel, except that would make you look really bad, because that would mean that in 2008, 20 years ago, you didn't sound the alarm. You didn't warn people in Australia that this guy was in ministry. He was in some sort of pastoral youth ministry. People probably became victims of his, and you did nothing, and you don't want to address that. Why did your board not mention the 2008 emails in this statement? I can only conclude, again, because you won't talk to me. You won't talk to anybody. You won't be held to account regarding this situation. But it's clear now that you're not willing to say that you did not know in 2008, probably because you did. And that means kids were probably harmed because you didn't speak out. Let's get back now to the Kingdom Accountability Project. I want to show you several portions, and I won't keep this long. I would encourage you to download a copy and read the whole thing. I do believe that those who implement this into their congregation will be implementing a protective measure to future victims and survivors of sexual abuse. It's not perfect, and people who don't want to be accountable won't be accountable, as we can see. But I do believe most believers want these type of systems in place in their congregation so that if someone, God forbid, is sexually abused by somebody in leadership, there is a pathway forward where they would be protected and everything would be looked at with full accountability in daylight. This became an issue for me because I reached out to Terry Jean Stevens from Heaven Bent, I think it was in February, because I saw that she was going to be doing an episode on the Kingdom Accountability Project. She did not know of the changes. She didn't know that I had been brought in as an author, and she didn't know that there were added protections for victims. So I reached out to her, and we had a conversation. In fact, she interviewed me, and you can listen to that episode. And in that episode, I said that I was sad that Patricia didn't follow the Kingdom Accountability Project in adjudicating her own situation. She produced a public statement on her own when it should have immediately gone to her board. But as we're going to learn later, her board is deeply compromised. At least that's the way I see it. Okay, so this is... Okay, I had to interrupt there because what we had was about 20 minutes of going through the document, and I don't think you would have lasted through it. But let me just run through the concerns real quick. Okay, number one, as soon as an allegation comes forth, there must be a resolute commitment to finding out the truth, to finding out what happened. I do not believe that has happened, particularly because they haven't talked to Daniel or to Kat. But we'll get to that in a minute. One of the things that I had requested when I became an author of the document was they would add a trauma-informed advocate to the process. That means that every church and every ministry would be working with a trauma-informed. That means that they understand these issues of abuse and the trauma that happens to a victim when they are sexually abused. That this advocate, what we're calling a TIA, would be able to call for an investigation. They would have authority to demand that elders or the board of directors look into something, and they would make sure that the person coming forward, the one that we call a reporter, the victim, that they would be protected. And that did not happen. There should be interviews with both the respondent, that would be the alleged offender, and the reporters, the alleged victims. And that didn't happen. Now, I don't believe that Daniel would be willing to talk to them because he is deeply traumatized by these events. But Kat did make herself available. Originally, when all this began, I was not involved. They did reach out to Kat and asked if they could talk to her. And she felt very much alone, very much unsafe. And so she said no. But once I became involved, I reached out to Kat and I said, listen, I think it would be really important for you to talk to them, and I would be happy to be there with you. And so we reached out to Dr. Michelle Burkett, the president of Patricia King Ministries, and we made Kat available. And we just had just a few conditions. One would be that I would be there present in the Zoom meeting, and we'd make sure that it wasn't an interrogation. It would be a fact-finding mission. So they got back to me and said that they would consider it, and then I never heard another word. So they did not follow the CAP document. They had the opportunity to talk to an alleged victim, and they said, not interested. The CAP document says that an alleged victim can choose their own advocate to represent them, and they chose me. And that advocate should be included in the investigation. It doesn't mean that they have authority. It doesn't mean they're going to tell the board what to do, but it means they're able to oversee deliberations to make sure that everything is done properly, and to make sure that every stone is uncovered, to make sure that they look at all the evidence. So I reached out to them to remind them that they had asked me to advocate for them, and the CAP document does say that you have to let me see what you're doing. And of course, they did not respond. They did respond at the end of the process, and I'll show you that email in just a minute. A senior leader needs to recuse themselves completely. That means that Patricia should not have been meeting with the board as they investigated. And I don't know if she did or didn't, but I do know this, that she reached out initially to Tara Jean with a statement, which should have been done by her board. She reached out to me to tell me her side of the story, at least with Kat. And then she sent me 2 letters that she wanted me to forward to Daniel and to his aunt. Now, to be clear, I do not know the identity of his aunt. I don't have her email. There's no way I could have forwarded that email to them, but she should not have been contacting me to contact them. They're in a very fragile state right now. And to have the person that they consider the offender trying to send them letters is highly inappropriate. But I did tell Daniel that I got those letters, and I said, would you like to receive them? Would your aunt like to receive them? And the answer was no. And that was the right answer. At the end of the process, it would have been correct for Patricia's board to reach out to me and to say, Patricia would like to communicate in some fashion with Daniel, with his aunt, with Kat, and then ask what would be the best way to do that. But to do it in the middle of the investigation before there's a resolution, highly inappropriate and would not be supported by the CAP document. And if I'm honest, I just reread those letters from Patricia, and it's really sad because they're virtually the same letter to 2 different people. I mean, they're related. Be a little creative and write them different letters, but they're literally copy-paste in everywhere that it did not need to be specific. Which shows me, and again, this is my opinion, that she's not really valuing them as humans. She's looking to move past this as quickly and as quietly as possible. And lastly, for the sake of transparency, the CAP document demands that you let your congregation, or in this case, supporters of a parachurch ministry, know that you are going through this investigative process. But they didn't do that. They communicated with Tara Jean, and as far as I can tell, reluctantly, but they did not want their supporters to understand what was going on. They don't want this to be a big deal. They don't want it to be in the public. And I don't know how you can be an author of a document that demands transparency and then be anything but transparent. Okay, now I want to get back to where I was before I screeched myself out of here. And this is a letter that I received from Bart Attaway, the vice president of Patricia King Ministries. And in this, he writes that they are committed to being compliant with the Kingdom Accountability Project, even as they weren't, even as they were being anything but compliant. I got an email from Bart Attaway, who is the vice president of the board of directors. And this is on March 23rd. So to be clear, I initially reached out a week earlier on the 16th. Dear Ron, I trust you are doing well. I wanted to take a moment and provide you with an update on behalf of the board of directors and ministry leadership of Patricia King Ministries. We are finalizing our review of the allegations against Patricia King regarding Kat's story. The allegations regarding Daniel's story are still in review. We will submit our report in writing confidentially to Mark Pfeiffer for his review in relation to the Kingdom Accountability Project compliance. We anticipate this submission taking place sometime early this week. So they got this done really quickly. I don't know how they could have talked to witnesses. Considering the fact that they're not saying anything public, I'm skeptical. But this, again, was a week after I had originally reached out to them, and they're saying we're already done with reviewing Kat's story, and we're going to soon be done with Daniel's story, and we are submitting to Mark Pfeiffer, who is the managing editor of the Kingdom Accountability Project, to make sure we're in compliance. But they're not in compliance. They're not even close to compliance. It did not begin with compliance. It began with Patricia making a statement. So the first thing that we need to do in order to be in compliance is to issue a statement to the public. We are sorry that we did not follow the Kingdom Accountability Project from the beginning. But I'm not going to hold my breath. I mean, if it wasn't so sad, it would be laughable. Here we are on the front page of the original copy of the Kingdom Accountability Project, and Patricia is listed as both an author and a member of the executive committee. And then if you go down, you can see the Reverend Robert Hodgkin and Reverend Michelle Burkett. Again, Michelle Burkett is the president of Patricia King Ministries, and Robert Hodgkin is a longtime friend. I believe he is part of the pastoral team of their church, and he's a board member. So you have 3 out of 4 or 5 board members that are writing, part of the executive committee, and endorsing the Kingdom Accountability Project, and yet they're not following it. So here we are at Patricia King Ministries, and under the About, the second thing here is the Kingdom Accountability Project. You click on it, and let's see what it says. All right, Kingdom Accountability Project. At Patricia King Ministries, we hold integrity, transparency, and biblical responsibility as foundational values to maintain the highest standards of ministry practice, governance, and stewardship. We operate under multiple layers of accountability. It's good, spiritual, legal, and financial. These structures ensure that our ministry walks in wisdom, operates in integrity, and advances the kingdom with excellence. Patricia King Ministries fully endorses the principles outlined in the Kingdom Accountability Project, but you don't. You do not. These are words. And this was what I was afraid of when I put my name on the Kingdom Accountability Project, that people would endorse it without living it, that they would use it to say, look, we're transparent, we tell the truth, we're honest. And then when there's a scandal, they would throw it out the window. I'm actually shocked that that's still up here on the website. So that is sad, because Patricia was one of the original authors of the document. And now that she's in this situation, it would appear that her and her board have violated it massively. And if I'm wrong, they can show me the evidence. I will apologize, but I'm not really going to apologize, because the reason I would be wrong is because they won't talk to me, because they've said there's nothing to see here. We're done. We're not going to be transparent. We're not going to make a statement. So I can only come to assumptions. And let that be a warning to any other ministry that is going to say, we embrace this document. I believe it's a good document, but we're only going to embrace it in name only. When it actually comes to our ministry, nah, not so much. Okay, so we're getting close to the end of this video. And one of the last things I want to do is talk about 3 deep concerns I have regarding the fitness of Patricia King's board to adjudicate this situation. The Kingdom Accountability document does address conflicts of interest. So, for instance, if I were part of a ministry that I was getting $100,000 a year from, and then I heard that the primary person bringing in money into that ministry was accused of something, I would be disqualified from being part of the group of people that would adjudicate that situation because I would have a conflict of interest. I would be seen, even if I was the most righteous person in the world, the optics are really bad because people would say, Ron, you're making $100,000 a year off of this person's ability to raise money. Of course, you're going to find them innocent. And that is a situation that it seems that we have with Patricia King Ministries. So I mentioned earlier, and let's go ahead and share the screen here. So we have the key employees and officers. This is 2024. I don't know that it's changed. I do know that Dr. Michelle Burkett was vice president. She is now the president. And Robert Hodgkin is still on, I don't know if he's still secretary, but he's still on the board. And as you can see, they make a decent part of their income from Patricia's ability to bring funds into the ministry. And I'm not criticizing the amount of money that they're making here. That is not what this is about. I'm simply saying that they're conflicted. They're compromised. They should have immediately said, we can't do this. We're going to call in people that we can trust, and we're going to recuse ourselves 100%, and we're going to let these outside leaders of integrity deal with this situation, because obviously the optics are bad because we each make over $70,000 a year from this ministry. And along with Patricia, that means that they make up a majority of the board. So the other 2 board members are irrelevant because those 3 can outvote and those 3 get money from the ministry. Okay, next I want to talk about LifeWave. LifeWave is a multi-level marketing company. Some call it network marketing. And personally, I think that network marketing is unethical. And I'm going to tell you why. Sometimes there is a great product behind it. Sometimes the product is a joke. And sometimes there's no product. But in order for you to make a lot of money in network marketing, you have to get other people to buy into the business. And so, if you're in ministry, if you're a Patricia King, if someone like me, if you are somebody who has influence because of your status as a minister, as a prophetic person, as a moral authority, you are leveraging that to pressure people to get into your, what they call, it's called a downline. So everybody in my downline, I don't have a downline because I don't do multi-level marketing, but if I did, I would have a downline. And every time they sold something, I would get a benefit from that. And that is really, really bad optics as a minister. But sadly, you, particularly in the NAR, you see a lot of these guys that are involved in multi-level marketing. Katie Souza is making money in this same industry called LifeWave. So what does Patricia King have to do with LifeWave? Well, I thought that Patricia King was involved in it. You know, I thought I had seen videos where she was encouraging people to get in her downline and she was telling them how to get involved. I want to read this letter to you because I wrote this to the board and I said, I think there's a problem here because it looks like several of you, Dr. Michelle Burkett is involved in LifeWave. She is I don't know what they call them, a salesman, an ambassador, or I'm sure they have a specific name, but she is involved in LifeWave. And so I brought up the conflict of interest because I don't know if Dr. Michelle Burkett is in Patricia's downline or if Patricia is in her downline, or maybe they're separate. I just know how this thing works. And it doesn't look good, but I brought it up to them because it is a real concern. Because if, for whatever reason, Dr. Michelle Burkett is making money when Patricia does well because Patricia's in her downline, or vice versa, then they have a vested interest to protect each other. So I did a little searching and I found out that there is a gentleman with the same last name as Bart Hadaway, who is also involved in LifeWave, who just happens to live in Maricopa County, where Patricia lives. I asked them about that because I'm all about asking before doing this, and they didn't answer. I never got a response, so I don't know, but it's not a very common name, and the fact that they're in that same area makes me think that there might be a connection, and therefore they cannot be the board who is adjudicating this. They can't be taken seriously unless Patricia is involved, and that is what Dr. Michelle told me. Let's take a look. Okay, so first let me show you exactly what I wrote to the board. It's number 2 down there, Patricia King's involvement with the product and multi-level marketing. I raised concerns regarding the promotion of a product that is not FDA approved, alongside references to institutions such as the Mayo Clinic. And there is a video where Patricia is promoting this product. It is a patch that you put on I guess you can put it anywhere in your body, but a lot of people put it on the back of their neck. And it allegedly uses light or heat from your body to stimulate stem cell activation or growth or reproduction or something like that. And I'm not commenting right now on whether or not it works. They do sell it. And Patricia, on her page, she was mentioning things about the Mayo Clinic that would lead someone to believe that the Mayo Clinic is actually behind it when they probably would not recommend this to anyone. I think she's saying that the Mayo Clinic applauds the idea of stem cell regeneration. But again, people, they assume what she's saying is that the Mayo Clinic is endorsing this. It is my belief that that's why the mention of the Mayo Clinic is on there, even though there is no proof, zero proof that this product produces or does what they say it does, stimulates stem cell activation, growth, etc. Okay, in a way that could be interpreted as an endorsement. So I asked the question, does LifeWay X39 work? Short answer, there's no strong, reliable scientific evidence that LifeWave X39 works as advertised. Here's a clear and honest breakdown. What it claims to do, a small patch you stick on your skin uses light phototherapy from your body. Supposedly activates stem cells, reduces pain, inflammation, and improves energy, healing, and sleep. What the science actually says. No solid independent evidence. Reviews consistently note lack of credible, peer-reviewed research supporting the big claims. Studies that are cited are often small, not well-controlled, published in low-quality journals, not widely replicated. That's a red flag in medical science. Number 2, mechanism is questionable. The idea that a sticker reflecting body heat or light can activate stem cells or cause major healing changes is considered biologically unclear or implausible by critics. Number 3, regulatory status. There is no clear FDA approval as a medical treatment for these claims. And it talks about Testimonies, placebo effect. Bottom line, likely low risk physically, meaning you're not going to hurt yourself, but not proven to do what it claims. And we got the warning sign. Marketing claims, especially stem cell activation, are way ahead of evidence. So using the name Mayo Clinic with something like this is a bit misleading. Straight talk. If something could truly activate stem cells and dramatically heal the body, it would be widely used in hospitals, backed by major clinical trials, not sold mainly through wellness, multi-level marketing style marketing. My advice, not mine, ChatGPT, don't rely on it for real medical issues. Be cautious about spending money on it. Now, here's the thing. We have ministers who are encouraging people to spend money on this, not just spend money on it, but to buy enough of it that they can sell it to others. People with probably no sales background, people who have no business investing in something like this are being encouraged by born-again, New Testament gospel preaching ministers. And it's one of the reasons why we have a credibility problem. If there's anybody who should not be pushing something like this, it is a minister of the gospel. Okay, I just want to jump in here, and I did a little bit more research on these LifeWave patches, and it's really worse than I thought. The general consensus is that it is a scam. This is an AI overview. And by the way, AI, it just checks the entire internet and then gives you a report. This is from Gemini. So the first one was ChatGPT. This is Gemini now. LifeWave is considered a scam by medical professionals, independent science reviewers, and consumer watchdogs. The company sells non-transdermal phototherapy patches like the flagship X39 patch, claiming they use light to activate stem cells, but these health claims are unsupported by valid, peer-reviewed clinical data. And yet you have ministers of the gospel who are making money convincing people not merely to buy the patches, but to become distributors or brand partners. See, I've learned that now. Brand partners, where they're encouraging other people to get involved and then they make money from that. That is unethical. Let's go on. There's a lack of scientific evidence. And this is interesting for me as an Israeli. Regulatory agencies, including the Israel Ministry of Health, have warned the public against purchasing the patches, stating that there is no established research to indicate efficacy. And of course, it states the obvious. If this works, why is it being sold through a multi-level marketing, network marketing? Why is it being sold in such a sketchy way? If it really works, you would think that it'd be on the shelves of every Walmart and Walgreens and Wall this and Wall that, but it's not. You see, the way it works is you don't really need a great product because you're not selling the product, you're selling the opportunity to make money. Good products don't need that. They sell themselves. But in this situation, you're saying this is your opportunity to hit it big, but it's not. Listen to me. Only 1% of people who get involved in multi-level marketing make significant income. So that means when these ministers are encouraging people to invest, to get involved, to become brand partners, 99 out of 100 of them are not going to make any significant income and will most likely lose their investment. In my opinion, it's snake oil, and it weakens our message. It makes us look like money-hungry fools. Jesus had no place to lay his head, but we're encouraging people on fixed incomes to invest in something that's unproven, where they're probably going to lose their money. I thought we're supposed to help people, not hurt them. Additionally, there was concern about encouraging elderly individuals or those on fixed incomes to become distributors, which could create the appearance of undue influence or exploitation. It was also mentioned that others on this board may be connected to this business. Could you clarify whether these concerns have been reviewed and what conclusions, if any, were reached? That is a concern because if any of you are in Patricia's downline, or if she is in yours, the result of this investigation could impact you financially. You see, I was concerned because it appears that many of them are involved, as you can see right here. So you have Dr. Michelle Burkett, Patricia King Enterprises, and you have Bill Hadaway, who lives, and I was mistaken, he doesn't live in Maricopa, he lives about an hour north in Surprise, Arizona, but he has the same last name as Bart. So I just asked them if there's a connection. Again, that nobody responded, nobody answered me, yes or no. So I don't know, but I'm going to assume yes, and that's why they didn't answer me. So when I brought this up to them, I was told this. Michelle finally did get back to me. And as you can see here, this is an email about other things as well. It's telling me who, and I don't want to give it away, but who their board of advisors are, which would be, I guess, the ICP. But do you see the FYI there? It says Patricia, for your information, Patricia has never been a brand partner with LifeWave. Now, that was a shock to me because I thought that I had seen videos of her. And when I went to the YouTube page, they were gone. The videos that I hit, and I had seen them. I had seen the videos. I'd even made a video about multi-level marketing. And guess what? I actually downloaded a copy of the videos. So here are the optics here. And I asked her to clarify. I wrote back to Dr. Michelle. I said, could you please clarify? I'm a little confused about that. Never got any clarification. So information was not forthcoming. And again, that's why we're making this video. For so long, those who were part of the celebrity culture within the charismatic world, they have not had to give an account. And so it appears of just saying, you can ask your questions, Ron, but it doesn't mean we're going to answer them. So now we're going to ask together. Those who are viewing this video along with me, we're asking the board Just be honest. Just be forthright. Because here's what it looks like. It looks like when I brought up the issue of a conflict of interest of Patricia being involved in a multi-level marketing enterprise that she could be using. Again, this is somebody who regularly goes to heaven. This is somebody with a lot of prophetic understanding, sees angels. And so when that person is telling you in a very sweet way, this could be the answer for you. And when I brought up the issue of the elderly and those on a fixed income, I didn't just make that up. You can see it right here. There's a video that is called Healthy, Wealthy, and Wise from Patricia King that has been viewed over 5,000 times. And it says Patricia King shares her personal journey of discovering help for chronic health issues. She discusses some research from Mayo Clinic on stem cells and their effect in healing, rejuvenation, and anti-aging. She also shares a product she and her husband have been using called LifeWave X39 patch that has been helpful.
But it actually attracts the infrared heat and light and goes to work and releases a chemical signal into your body to go and repair. And I've seen under the microscope stem cells that were dead and then those that were rejuvenated. It's fascinating. And if you were to buy this retail, it would be $150 a month, which is still a really good deal. But when you sign up as a recurring purchaser or a distributor, you get them for so much less. When you sign up as a diamond distributor, you get 19 sleeves given to you to use, which would be enough for at least 2 in a family to do over 6 months. Now, if you have 3 other people sign up for diamonds, then it totally, almost completely covers your initial investment. So many people are actually going into this as a health business, helping people get healthy, but also they are making good money. In fact, some people in the company are actually making, and I know someone who knows someone who is making this, $25,000 per week. That's $100,000 a month, or $1.2 million a year.
Now, if she was just offering this as advice, hey, here's a great way for you to make some extra money, that would not be an issue. But what she is going to do is ask people to sign up in her downline, which means that she is going to make money off of the people who sign up off of her. And that is information that you need to disclose. And again, this is why bringing multi-level marketing into a ministry setting, into a church, is unethical and extremely problematic, divisive, the opposite of what Paul said ministry should be in 2 Corinthians chapter 7, when he said, we did not take advantage of you.
There are people that are seniors often say, I'm on a limited income, but you don't have to be on a limited income. So I just highly recommend you get signed up right away if you would like that. So what you're being offered is $1,500 worth of coaching and your product that you get, which is what you're going to use. So it's like it's just such a blessing. And if you sign up someone, if you sign up 3 people, your initial investment is pretty much paid for. And so you get to use the product for free, you get other people involved, and you get the opportunity to make extra income. If you want more information on this, and if you want to either purchase the product or become a diamond, I mean, you can come in lower if you want. You can come in on a bronze, silver, gold, but you're not going to get the same benefits. You are not going to get all those benefits, and you definitely won't get the coaching and the San Diego offer and that. But you can still come in on that and benefit. But I highly recommend signing up as a diamond.
But that video is now gone. They took it down from the internet. And now Michelle is telling me, no, Patricia, she's never been a brand partner of Lifeway. Now, I don't know if she's using semantics, but I did what any responsible human being would do, is I went to ChatGPT and I asked if this was a correct statement. And let's look what Chat told me. The statement, Patricia King has never been a brand partner with LifeWave, appears to be false, or at least very misleading, based on available evidence. Here's what can be verified. Direct association with LifeWave. Patricia King has promoted LifeWave publicly and linked it through her platforms. For example, her content and events include LifeWave references and links such as lifewave.com/team PK, Patricia King, which is typically a referral/partner enrollment link. In other words, people can join. They can buy product and they can join her downline where they sell product and she would get a portion of that income. Now, that income may go to the ministry. It may go to Patricia. That would be something for another investigation. Nevertheless, she, according to chat, is using her influence as a significant leader in the body of Christ, a powerful, sweet personality to encourage people to join LifeWave. So bottom line here, down at the bottom, there is clear evidence she has promoted and participated in LifeWave's business ecosystem, including using referral structures typical of brand partners. While there is no easily accessible official roster listing her title, the available data strongly supports that she functioned as a LifeWave brand partner or an equivalent role. In other words, she was using her name, her brand, to encourage people to get involved in LifeWave in her downline, which again is called Team PK. I even believe they have an email address, teampk@gmail.com. So, Dr. Michelle, come on. I mean, you wrote that. That was, if it's semantics, then it's dishonest. And obviously, Patricia is involved in LifeWave. You tried to scrub it. There's still stuff on Facebook. There are pictures up there of her and her assistant. There's even, talk about they're going on a yacht together and you can enjoy it. Come on. She's obviously a part of LifeWave, and you deceived me. You told me that she wasn't a brand partner, and clearly she is involved. So that brings up the question of compromise or a conflict of interest. Again, number one, it's my belief that multi-level marketing is unethical. Number two, if you are a minister, it is absolutely unethical. We talked earlier about Mark Pfeiffer, who is the managing editor of the Kingdom Accountability Act, and he is the one that they have said will hold them accountable regarding compliance to the Kingdom Accountability Project. I keep saying act. Kingdom Accountability Project. In his church, you cannot be in leadership if you are involved in multi-level marketing. Why? Because he recognizes, as do so many of my pastor friends, that you have a massive conflict of interest when you have prophetic and moral sway over people. There are many ministers who have used multi-level marketing to get wealthy and to get people in their congregations involved, and it almost always ends up in a shipwreck, division, hurt feelings, people fighting over who came to me first. He's in my downline. No, he's in my, it just leads to a lot of really ugly ungodliness. So I do get concerned when I see Patricia online encouraging people with limited income to invest in something in which 90% of the people that get involved lose money or don't make money. But the real issue is, why would you lie to me? Why would you tell me that she's not involved? Do you think you're not going to get caught? Rather than just tell the truth, now you've got thousands of people who know that you appear to be a part of LifeWave and possibly making money off of each other. But as a board member, as a minister, that you wrote me, you even CC'd it to Mark Pfeiffer, you lied to me. And there should be accountability there. And when you lie to me, you're not lying to me. You're lying to the body of Christ, who wants there to be transparency and accountability regarding Kat and regarding Daniel. Okay, I want to move on to the last thing, and that has to do with a third conflict of interest, and that has to do with a video that Robert Hodgkin, a very close friend of Patricia's, put out a few months ago. And I'm just going to play about a minute or two of it and tell you why I'm concerned.
I want to try to take on a tough topic today. As I'm sure you've noticed, there is all sorts of exposure and accusation and controversy going on in the church today, especially here online. And some of it is definitely of God. After all, God does expose corruption and wrongdoing, often as a first step towards healing. But if you've been paying attention of late, you may have noticed something troubling. There's not a whole lot of healing that seems to be coming forth from what's currently going on. As a matter of fact,
See, I'm going to disagree with that, massively disagree with that, Robert. I don't know if you're involved in any type of advocacy or with victims, but there's tremendous healing going on. I could show you email after email, text message after text message, where people are sharing that for the first time they feel that they can come forward. For the first time they can speak the truth. Maybe what you're referring to is the backlash against the lying, against the sexual abuse, against the manipulation, that people are rightly upset and concerned. But there is tremendous healing. If you would like me to send you the proof of that healing, I would be more than willing. I would love to sit down with you over Zoom and show you how much. I mean, talk to Tammy Woods, talk to Deborah Perkins, who after so many years finally came forward, or Sarah Monk, who came forward to tell her story. There is tremendous healing that is coming with exposure. But let's continue.
All too often, it seems like the opposite is happening, where the church and believers are getting mired in outrage and offense and bitterness and anger, and it's creating this atmosphere of fault finding and division.
Oh, Robert, that's just horrible that is happening. You know what would be amazing? If people were transparent, if people were accountable, then you probably wouldn't find this anger, bitterness, fault finding, which I don't believe exist. You know, the people that I relate to, I don't see any anger, bitterness, or fault finding. But part of that, well, there is anger. There is anger, and I think it's righteous anger. And it's over what I'm dealing with right now, is that you guys have stiff-armed me. And after initially saying that you would investigate, then you didn't include me, that you were supposed to, according to the document that you're being held accountable to by Mark Pfeiffer, compliance, that was the word that was used. You were supposed to involve me, at least give me reports, but you guys have constantly stiff-armed me. And then at the very end, you sent word, none of you had the courage to get a hold of me and tell me. You sent somebody else to me to tell me you have no comment. They've investigated and it's over, and they're not saying anything. Why do you think people are upset, Robert? Read the room. It's because of the lack of accountability.
So here's my question. Here's what I want to try to tackle today. We're definitely in a time where some exposure is needed, but we want to make sure that we respond in a way that brings forth healing, that brings forth what God wants to do in seasons like this. So what is the correct response in seasons like this? What is the biblical response in seasons like this? Because the Bible...
Well, I mean, I can tell you that because it's in the Bible. The biblical response in seasons like this, when sin is exposed and the sinner, the committer of the sin, is an elder level person in the body of believers, then there must be an investigation. And that investigation must be open and transparent, not like what you guys did. It must lead to some resolution that you don't keep private, but you tell your supporters. That's who you owe it to. So in 1 Timothy 5, it's talking about in the congregation, but in the setting of a parachurch ministry that we really don't see so much in the New Covenant that I can think of. But you have a board of directors, and that would be the elders. And then you have the supporters. That would be the congregation. So you have a duty to be open and transparent with your supporters, because two serious allegations have arisen regarding the character and the actions of Patricia King more than 25 years ago. If she's been exonerated by evidence, then you have a responsibility to tell people that. And if she hasn't been exonerated or she's been found guilty, you have a responsibility to share that. The Bible says in 1 Timothy 5:19, if there are two or more allegations, there must be an investigation. And then in verse 20, it says that the person who sinned must be publicly rebuked so that the others may fear. That's what the Bible says. That's what should happen. But let you share.
Because the Bible is not silent about the need for exposure. But the Bible's also not silent about the dangers of giving place to the accuser of the brethren, of becoming a sort of a religious fault finder, or in creating division amongst the...
Okay, Robert, accuser of the brethren, that has become the catchphrase of the day. It doesn't mean what you think it means. I guess what you're saying right now is I'm the accuser of the brethren. How did this begin? It began with me contacting Patricia and saying, hey, your board needs to be involved in this. Then it began with me going to your board and saying, hey guys, you need to pull back Patricia, and you guys need to be involved, and you guys need to investigate. So how do you get from that to the accuser of the brethren? Who is the accuser here? In all these situations, I mean, you're talking, Robert, like it's just going on. It's all over. It's out of control. Can you name some names? Because when I look at the people that are looking into things like Mike Winger, like John Mark Baker, like myself, the Remnant Radio guys, Blaze Foray, Stephen Powell, or Lynn, Julie Royce, they're dealing with facts. I don't know any of those people who are making up stories. They are listening to victims who have been hurt and abused and assaulted in many cases. So when you just throw out that term, but we gotta be careful of the accuser of the brethren, what are you talking about? Give one specific example where it wasn't a righteous exposure, but it was the accuser of the brethren. Because I hear lots of people saying the exposure is good, it's right, but you gotta watch out for the accuser. Where has it been wrong? Just give me one example. Was it in the Bethel exposure? Was it in the Sean Bowles exposure? Was it in the Che-An confrontation? Was it in the Mike Bickle exposure? In the situation with Patricia, you had two people who are now unbelievers, who were very much on fire for God 25 years ago, but went through traumatic experiences. This is their testimony, through their associating with Patricia, that hurt their faith. They're now not walking with the Lord, and now they're coming forth and they're saying, this happened to me. Is that the accuser of the brethren? Because you can deal with it in a righteous way. And certainly as an advocate for those two people, I gave you every opportunity to deal with this in the right way, and you didn't. Let me explain to you what the accuser of the brethren is. And I don't want to give a book plug here, but well, maybe I do. If you pick up my book, and Robert, I will send you a free copy. I have a whole chapter on the accuser of the brethren, and it's not when you confront sin in leadership. The accuser of the brethren is not a call for accountability and transparency. It is typically, honestly, it's what you're doing right now in this video. It's when you are saying to people who are calling for accountability and calling for righteousness and calling for elders to do the right thing, for there to be investigations, and for people to follow the Kingdom Accountability Project. You're calling those people, again, this is how I read what you're saying, you're calling those people accusers. And if not, tell me who are the accusers. Let me give you a great example in the Bible of how the accuser of the brethren works. It's when you try and do something great for God and a voice comes and says, you're not worthy, you're doing it out of pride, you're just trying to hurt people. That's the accuser of the brethren. I'll give you a great example. When young David shows up to kill Goliath, he showed up with food for his brothers, and he hears the Philistine, and he starts inquiring about, this situation, and he's ready to do something, and his brother Eliab sees him, and he says, I know how evil and conceited your heart is. That's the accuser of the brethren. So there are people out there who are caring for the sheep, who are trying to see justice come forth. And I'm going to be honest with you. I have fondness for Patricia. I've known her for 7 years. I care for her. I'm asking you guys to do the right thing. That is not the fruit of the accuser of the brethren. It's just not. You got to stop throwing out that phrase every time you don't like something that is being exposed, unless you're going to give specific examples where it is the accuser of the brethren and not a spirit of righteousness, a spirit of protecting the flock of God. As a leader, I don't care about my reputation. My reputation, my platform, it belongs to God. He owns it. I'm concerned about the sheep, because it doesn't say, if you cause one of these famous ministers to stumble, it will be better for you to have a millstone tied around your neck and thrown into the deepest part of the sea. It says, if you cause a little one, a little lamb, a little broken, wounded one to stumble or to be offended or to leave the faith, then it will be worse for you than to have a millstone tied around your neck and thrown into the deepest part of the sea. And when I think of little ones, I think of Kat, who, as far as I can understand, came to Canada, loved Patricia and Ron, and then it appears, and I don't know because I wasn't part of your investigation. I was supposed to be, I wasn't. But it appears that her faith was deeply wounded. And I think of Daniel, who was in a horribly abusive relationship, and people allegedly knew about it and didn't protect him. Those are little ones. And I would not want to stand before the Lord and say, I did not advocate for them. I did not protect them. And if that is you, and if you didn't do the right thing then, now's the time to repent. There is love. There is forgiveness, but not when you're hiding and not when you're stiff-arming and not when you're saying, we have nothing to say. But let's let Robert finish here.
Brethren are damaging the faith of believers. That's why this is a tough topic, because there's a tension here of what needs to happen, but also where the enemy gets in to bring about results that God never intended. So that's why I want to look at, how do we stand?
Okay, so that's enough. Yeah, again, where has it gone too far, Robert? Where has it gone too far? Bring examples where it's gone too far and where people are losing their faith. I see people gaining their faith. I have people email me regularly who are back in church. I'll give you an example. I was in a church this past Sunday ministering, and a husband and wife came to the congregation that day, did not know I was ministering. And when they got in, they said, oh, there's the guy from YouTube, which is really funny because I've never been known as the guy from YouTube. But that's what she told her husband. It's the guy from YouTube. And they were once part of Jeremiah Johnson's congregation. They were actually part of their team. And they went through a difficult season where they left. And for several years, they have been unchurched until they started watching my videos. So it seems that you're implying that I'm the accuser of the brethren, but these people who were unchurched, not in church anymore, watched my videos and went back. They had been going for about 3 weeks. And then ironically, I show up there and minister, and we had a great time at the end of the service. I'm telling you, Robert, people are finding their faith because there are a lot of people that they can look into some of the nonsense in the charismatic world and say, that's not Christianity. These people are flying on jets and getting rich and becoming millionaires. That's not Christianity. That's not washing the feet of the disciples. And they're being pushed away from the faith when they hear that people are getting away with sexually abusive behavior and nobody is saying anything. People are shamed into silence. That is what is causing people to lose their faith. But now that they're seeing people say, no, there must be accountability. There must be standards for leadership. I think it's bringing people back into the church. But that is not why I brought it up. I brought it up because Robert shared this video after Patricia was implicated in these situations with Kat, and maybe it was after Daniel came forth. I'm not sure when it was. That has now been deleted because Patricia shared it. She shared that video. So she's been implicated. And then here is her right-hand man who is running interference for her with a video saying, okay, exposures, they're kind of good sometimes, but you got to watch out for the accuser. It seems like he's giving her cover. That's how it seems. And then when she shared it as something, she has a lot of influence, a lot more influence than me and a lot more influence than Robert. She's telling other people to watch this video that gives her cover. That doesn't look right. And that was brought to her attention, and she deleted that. And I think Robert deleted the video altogether, but it just shows why he can't be on that team that's investigating her. He's already pre-concluded, it would appear, that she is the victim, not the perpetrator, the victim of the accuser of the brethren. So that's why this is just one giant mess, and it's why I'm not surprised her ministry has said to me, we're done. We don't owe you an explanation. We're not giving you an explanation. We have learned it doesn't go well for people like Bethel, who are, maybe clumsily, but at least trying to address the allegations against them. We are learning that it goes better with people like Todd White, who are simply ignoring the allegations and moving forward. Nothing to see here. But it's not what the Kingdom Accountability Project says, and it's still on your website, Patricia. So while this may be a great strategy for you, it is not a kingdom strategy, and it will ultimately fail because the reformation that is coming is not going to come from the celebrity ministers. It's going to come from the folks, the believers, the grassroots, and they want accountability. And what we see here, I'm sorry, but it's a circus. You've got people on a board who are in the same business, not just the same business, but a ethically questionable business, not only because it's multi-level marketing, but because we don't even know if these patches do anything. 3 out of the 5 board members get significant income from the ministry, or at least they did in 2024. And you've got Robert making videos that are seemingly giving cover to Patricia, saying that people who are bringing forth the allegations are the accuser of the brethren. And if it's not what he's saying, it's really unclear, because it appears that that's what he's saying, which is why Patricia probably shared it. Now let's take a look at the ICP that's representing Patricia King Ministries. So the ICP would be the Independent Council of Presbyters, and their job is to weigh in, but they're not either. Again, I was told that they're done. That was after they told me that they had turned over their initial review to this ICP. And let's just take a look at who they are. All right, you will remember this graphic because it's the one that said that Patricia has never been a brand partner with Lifeway, but I want to look above. It says, we have submitted our internal investigative report to our overseers and advisors. And those people are Randy Clark, Michael Maiden, Cheon, James Gall, Cindy Jacobs, Stacy A. Campbell, Mark Pfeiffer, and John Kelly. I guess there might be more than one, but I know John Kelly is the leader of ICAL, as it says there, the International Coalition of Apostolic Leaders. So a couple things about that. Number one, I mean, it's a who's who, but I don't know what they did. Did they do anything? It says that they have submitted their own internal investigative report, which I've never seen. Technically, guys, you are supposed to give that to me as the advocate. That is what the document says that you've asked Mark Pfeiffer, one of the folks here, to hold you accountable to. You're supposed to give that internal investigative report to me so I can see it. And I'm supposed to be able to make an alternative report or agree with your report based on the evidence. But since you are refusing to talk, I'm at a loss. And that's why we're going to the public. But I just would like to ask these guys, Randy, Michael, Che, James, Cindy, Stacy, Mark, and John, have you really received this internal investigative report, number one? And number two, according to the Kingdom Accountability Project, which is a ministry of ICAL, John Kelly is I think it's called the overseeing convener, which is like a president. He's a leader of ICAL. I just want to ask, are you guys following the document that is on your website that I helped author, that I'm behind, that I love, are you following it here? Because they've now dragged you into it. They've dragged your name, John Kelly and Mark Pfeiffer, into this situation, saying that you guys are part of the overseeing team. And yet I don't know that you guys actually did anything. Did you review the evidence? Do you have any remarks? Or are you standing behind their non-response? So I'm sharing this because they shared it with me. And I assume they shared it with me to make it appear that they are accountable to you guys. Now, obviously, I have a real issue with at least one person on this list, and that would be Cheon, because he is also one of the initial endorsers of the Kingdom Accountability Project, which I shared earlier. And yet he is not making himself accountable regarding what I believe are credible allegations of abusive pastoral behavior back in the 1990s and early 2000s. I won't go into those stories again, but it is interesting that one of the people that is going to hold them accountable will not be held accountable on his own issues. So I don't really trust it. I mean, come on. It's like a club. You know, what happens if one of these other people is implicated? Will Patricia then join that overseeing group that has no statement? So I'm just asking for some clarity here. Are you very famous leaders? You call yourselves apostles and prophets. Are you willing to adhere to 1 Timothy 5:19 regarding these allegations against Patricia? Or are you siding with their non-investigation or non-public statement? I'm trying to hold you accountable. I say that with respect. What say you? What do you guys have to say to Kat and to Daniel? As shepherds, as ministers, as people who have come into a sacred calling to protect God's sheep, do you have any response to Kat and to Daniel regarding these allegations? Do you? You might be wondering how Daniel is doing, and the answer is not good. Not good at all. He has prepared a victim statement, which I'm going to read to you now. Daniel's victim impact statement. The 5 or so years of sexual and spiritual abuse I experienced at the hand of Matthew Ford has had a profound and devastating impact on me and my family. I ceased contact with my mom, stepdad, and 2 siblings for almost 2 years, from early 2000 to late 2001. My relationship has been mostly restored. However, I feel the closeness I once had with my brother has never recovered. My family was traumatized by what Matthew Ford did to me and my decision to disown them for that period, which has continued to impact their lives. Matthew also groomed my dad, who was oblivious to what Matthew was doing to me, noting my parents had divorced 10 years prior. This grooming was so successful that my dad moved in with Matthew and I for 6 months, for the 6 months prior to Matthew flying to Kelowna in July 2001, i.e. during the first half of 2001. He even defended Matthew in response to my mom and siblings' deep concerns raised with him. My dad had been diagnosed with stomach cancer in 1998, which had spread to his liver by early 2001. Matthew promised God would heal him and would regularly pray for him. My dad believed him, that God's power working through him would lead to a miraculous healing. He believed he would be healed right up until his death. My dad never came to understand, or at least acknowledge, what was happening to me or him. He died when I was in Canada in late August 2001. I never had the opportunity to speak with him before he died. He had slipped into a coma by the time his sister could reach me via phone in Kamloops. Interestingly, Matthew broke Patricia's rule that we do not see each other and drove from Kelowna to Kamloops to tell me about my dad's serious condition. I'm unaware if Patricia even reprimanded him for this. And by the way, I might add, why were they not allowed to see each other by Patricia if she didn't know that their relationship had become sexual? After I returned to Perth in 2002, following a year interstate with Matthew after our time in Canada, I was in denial as to what Matthew had done to me over the previous 3 to 4 years and remained in regular phone contact with him until 2004. For many years, I abused alcohol and engaged in other addictive behaviors because of this abuse. I never regained the trust of leaders in the church, with one exception, a pastor of a church I attended in the mid to late 2000s who mentored me. I remain grateful for his kindness and love. In late 2012, early 2013, I was on an international work trip when I believed a senior Australian government representative was harassing me, being very inappropriate toward me. I was unable to deal with this situation and felt trapped. This triggered my unresolved experiences with Matthew Ford years earlier. As a result, I had a nervous and emotional breakdown and could not work at full capacity for almost 2 years, including 1 year of not working at all. I was diagnosed with an anxiety disorder. I completely lost myself, turning to alcohol, partying, and sex to numb everything. I had to leave my dream job in Canberra and return to Perth as I was so unwell. I suffered financial loss due to being unable to control my spending, which was a coping mechanism during this time. This has had long-term implications for my financial well-being and security. I didn't recover in any capacity until about 2018 or 2019, while full recovery remains an ongoing process. I have been on anxiety medication ever since, with ongoing psychological counseling, which has cost me tens of thousands of dollars. I've missed out on job opportunities and career progression due to my anxiety. My work performance continues to be affected, with several degrees and years of experience, including being accepted into one of the most highly regarded graduate positions in the country in 2009. I am otherwise well placed to achieve in my career. My self-confidence remains low. I have had trouble initiating and maintaining romantic relationships, lacking trust, and struggling with intimacy. I have not worked at full capacity since the recording and release of the Heaven Bent episode, A Safe Person, which aired in February 2026. This is due to my resurfaced trauma and Patricia and her board's response to date to my allegations, i.e., not undertaking an independent investigation or even a credible in-house investigation, denying memory of events, including concerns raised with Patricia by my aunt at the time, and ignoring the contents of my 2008 email, which is clear evidence of Patricia's knowledge of the abuse and her unwillingness to protect others from Matthew. I've had several weeks absent from work, exhausting personal and annual leave, and I'm now only working part-time hours. Any further leave due to my health condition is now taken without pay. I haven't been able to work from the office during this time. I've experienced panic attacks and near panic attacks, including recently after attending church for the first time in a decade for my niece's baptisms and on a flight to Melbourne to visit a friend. I am regularly suspicious of people's intentions, particularly Christians. This has served me well to protect me from problematic beliefs, predatory individuals, and people lacking self-awareness, but also means constant hypervigilance, which is exhausting. In large part, due to Matthew Ford's abuse compounded by Patricia and her board's handling of these claims to date, my trust in Christian leaders and most other influential Christian personalities is almost nil. This has also impacted my ability to trust anyone in senior positions of leadership, including senior executives in the workplace. So, no, Daniel is not doing well. And if you're watching this, maybe take a minute right now and pray for Daniel. Pray for the healing of his soul. And maybe reach out to him. You can do so through me, letting him know that you believe him and that you care for him. Thank you.
This is Kat, and this is my victim impact statement. The grooming and emotional and spiritual abuse by Patricia King and her husband Ron, who also sexually abused me, had an indelible impact on my life. At the time, my life felt completely shattered and destroyed. I went from believing I had a future in her ministry with big promises and prophecies, to suddenly being rejected, cast out, and shunned. The hypocrisy between how she treated me and what she preached and continues to preach to this day caused me to lose my faith entirely. I lost my biological mother to cancer when I was 4 years old and later endured years with an abusive stepmother. Patricia King became the third mother figure I lost in my life, which left deep trust issues, particularly towards strong or authoritative women. Because I did not yet understand the patterns of grooming and abuse, my experience with Patricia King left me particularly vulnerable to further manipulation, exploitation, and abusive relationships in the years that followed. The impact extended beyond emotional harm and also resulted in significant financial consequences over time, not least the many years of professional therapy. As a result of the trauma I endured, I now live with complex PTSD, which continues to affect every area of my life, as a wife, mother, and friend. It impacts my ability to feel vulnerable and safe in relationships, and I can become triggered unexpectedly by ordinary interactions with my husband, children, friends, or even strangers. Back then, I believed Patricia treated me ruthlessly in order to protect her ministry and career. At a time when I desperately needed care and support, her actions had a devastating impact on my life. When I came forward several months ago, she victimized me a second time, responding with dismissal, minimizing our relationship, and advancing a false narrative that denies the abuse both she and I know occurred. She has suggested that I, a woman in my early 20s, was somehow in love with her 51-year-old husband, while also claiming that we barely knew each other. Now, in her mid-70s, she still appears more concerned with protecting her career, income, and ministry than with the person she abused.
At the beginning, I told you that at the end I would give you my verdict. And my verdict is based on the evidence that I have. And there may be more, but the people who allegedly investigated this situation have gone silent. It's also based on reason and science. Let me tell you what I know about Kat. Kat is a woman in her late 40s living in Germany. She has no lawsuit. She's not seeking money. She has no platform to build. She came forward publicly knowing full well that a powerful ministry with millions of followers would push back against her. And they did. She has had to sit and watch people online call her a liar. She's had to watch the charismatic machine dismiss her. And that's not nothing. That costs something emotionally, and it can be traumatic. And she paid that price anyway. Now, let's talk about what science tells us. Research on false allegations of sexual misconduct consistently puts the rate at between 2 and 10%, but with most peer-reviewed studies landing closer to 2 to 5%. That means when someone makes an allegation of this nature, there is a 90 to 98% probability that they're telling the truth. That's where we start, even before we look at the specifics of Kat's case. And the specifics make her case even more credible. Kat describes freezing in the hot tub. She describes going back the next day because she couldn't process what had happened, telling herself that it had to have been an accident, and then it happened again. Friends, that is textbook trauma response. That is exactly what survivors describe. That is not the behavior of someone fabricating a story. That is the behavior of someone whose brain is trying to protect them from a reality too painful to deal with. She describes Ron Cocking as a father figure. She loved him. She loved Patricia. They were like family to her. She had known them since she was 16 years old. 6 years. She translated for Patricia at conferences. She was invited to live in their home. She was invited into the war room, their prayer ministry. This was not a brief volunteer relationship. This was family, and that matters because the betrayal of someone you love like a parent is exactly the kind of wound that takes decades to come forward about. Now, let's look at Patricia's response. And before we even get into what happened in the hot tub, there's something that should trouble every person watching this video. In Patricia's public statement, she does not refer to Kat by name, not once. The woman who at times lived in her home, whom she invited to be part of the war room, who translated for her at conferences, and who she knew since she was 16 years old, Patricia refers to her only as a young woman who briefly volunteered with her ministry. Briefly? Really? Kat knew Patricia and Ron for 6 years. Let me say it again. At times, she lived in their home. She traveled with them. She was in their hot tub. She was invited personally by Patricia to come to Canada. This was not a brief volunteer relationship. This was family, Kat's word, and by every measurable standard, an accurate one. So why would Patricia minimize it? Why strip Kat of her name? Why reduce 6 years to briefly? The most obvious answer is that the closer the relationship, the more believable and damaging the allegations. A stranger who briefly volunteered, that's easy to dismiss. A young woman whom you personally invited into your home, who loved you like a mother, who trusted your husband like a father, well, that's a different story. And here's the other problem with Patricia's narrative. She's asking you to believe that Ron and Kat developed a mutual emotional connection and they barely knew each other. But that's not how these things work. If Patricia's own version of events is true, that there was a genuine emotional connection between Ron and Kat, then that connection developed over 6 years of relationship. You can't have it both ways, and you can't claim the relationship was brief and insignificant while simultaneously claiming it produced a mutual emotional bond deep enough that physical lines were crossed. The truth is, one of those things is false. Either the relationship was brief, in which case there was no mutual emotional connection, or there was a real and significant relationship, in which case Patricia's minimization of it is deliberately misleading. Kat says the latter, and the evidence supports her. Patricia's narrative is this, that Ron and Kat developed a mutual emotional connection that became unhealthy, that lines were crossed, and that when it came to light, she dealt with it swiftly. She's careful not to specify what those lines actually were. No details, just lines were crossed mutually, and she handled it. But Kat is very specific. Kat says that Ron Cocking put his hand inside her bikini pants and touched her genitals. Not once, multiple times, in a hot tub while others were present using the jets and the bubbles as cover. Patricia also has enormous motivation to deny. She draws a salary of nearly $150,000 a year from her ministry. Several board members are on the payroll as well. Her reputation, her donor base, her entire platform depends on people believing in her integrity and believing that she's a fighter for survivors. And when everything is at stake, the temptation to protect yourself, even at the cost of the truth, is very real. Kat, on the other hand, has absolutely nothing to gain here. Patricia has everything to lose. And then there is the testimony of Michael, a man from Germany who spent time with Ron and Patricia in Kelowna. After hearing Kat's testimony, he remembered something that happened in Ron's car. The two of them were driving around in Ron's Dodge, and he remembered Ron pointing at young women in summer dresses and saying they dress like prostitutes and then wonder why they get raped. He didn't need to share that. He came forward after hearing Kat's story. That memory came rushing back, and it's corroboration. That is an independent confirmation of exactly the mentality that Kat describes, a mentality that when a man crosses a line, it's the woman's fault, or as Tara Jean put it, blame the bikini. I believe Kat. The science supports Kat. The corroborating testimony supports Kat, and Patricia's own behavior, minimizing a 6-year relationship, stripping Kat of her name, issuing a denial without an investigation, violating the very document that she helped write, does not support Patricia. We began with a baseline of 90 to 98% probability that Kat is telling the truth. That was before we even looked at a single shred of evidence. Having examined it all, I think we've arrived at a much higher end of that range. But you need to draw your own conclusions. These are mine. Now, let's turn to Daniel. Daniel came forward for one reason. He saw how Kat was being treated, dismissed, minimized, disbelieved, and he couldn't remain silent. He's no longer a believer. He has no stake in the charismatic world. And knowing how this process has re-traumatized him, I can assure you he has nothing to gain by this. And yet he stepped forward at great personal cost to say, this happened to me too. And what happened to him happened in Patricia King's ministry, under Patricia King's watch, after warnings were brought to Patricia King directly. Let me walk you through what we know. In 2001, Daniel's aunt traveled to Kelowna to attend Patricia King's School of the Spirit. She was deeply concerned about Matthew Ford, a man who had been grooming and sexually abusing her nephew Daniel since he was 17 years old. And that makes it a crime. She approached Ruth Ripley, Patricia's assistant, and told her directly that Matthew Ford is a predator because Matthew was now in Kelowna as well. She told Ruth that she believed that Matthew had sexually violated her nephew, Daniel. Ruth told her that she would bring it to Patricia. And then Ruth came back and said Patricia had discounted everything. If Ruth doesn't remember that conversation, then we have to believe the aunt. Given the amount of activity, people coming and going through their ministry in Kelowna, it's possible that Ruth doesn't remember. But what's not possible is that the aunt is making this up. For her, this was a traumatic moment, the kind of thing you don't forget. The type of event that is etched in your memory forever. Earlier, on a ministry trip to Australia, Ron Cocking, Patricia's husband, prayed for Matthew and told Daniel's aunt privately, something's not right with that guy. That is Patricia's own husband raising a red flag. According to Daniel's aunt, Matthew's first prayer partner in Kelowna came to Patricia and said the Lord had shown her that Matthew was a wolf in sheep's clothing. Patricia removed her as Matthew's prayer partner, but didn't do anything else. 3 separate witnesses in 2000 to 2001, 3 separate red flags, and yet Matthew Ford remained in the war room. Despite these concerns, Matthew was allowed to drive to the airport several hours away to pick up Daniel. And we now know from Daniel that Matthew wasted no time in continuing to traumatize Daniel with sexual abuse, driving straight to a hotel from the airport. And it could have been prevented. Daniel and Matthew were eventually separated. They were brought into a meeting and told that they could no longer be around each other. Now, I want to ask a simple question. If the adults in that room did not know or suspect that a sexual relationship had developed, Then why were they there? Why were they separating the two of them? You don't separate two people without cause. The separation itself is evidence that Patricia's team knew something was deeply wrong. The tragedy is that no one in that room had the clarity or the courage to call it what it was. Clergy sexual abuse. Not mutual attraction, not a sin between equals. The fact is, Matthew Ford was Daniel's spiritual authority. He was years older. He had groomed Daniel systematically, isolating him from his family, extracting his secrets, using prayer and alcohol and spiritual manipulation to prime him for abuse. That is not mutual. That's predatory. But here's where the story takes a turn that I simply find impossible to overlook. In 2008, 7 years after Kelowna, Daniel reached out to Ruth Ripley by email. And in that email, he stated clearly and explicitly that he had been subjected to unresolved sexual and emotional abuse under Matthew Ford's leadership. He was writing because Matthew had resurfaced in Australia as a pastor working with young people, and he was afraid. He didn't want another person to be abused. He wanted someone with influence to act. Patricia King. Ruth responded promptly on Patricia's behalf. There was no shock, no outrage. If they truly didn't know in 2001, then the response from any slightly empathetic individual would have been, "Oh my goodness, we had no idea. How can we help you?" Even if they knew, it's shocking how dismissive they are. No offer of support or ministry to a survivor of clergy sexual abuse, just, "We hope God has healed him, and we'll pray." A predator was working with young people in Australia. A survivor was asking for help, and the response was, "We'll pray." That was after Ruth said that Patricia's initial response was, "We just trust that God has done a major healing in him, and that God has brought him all the way through into victory." But they didn't know if that had happened. Patricia markets herself as a champion for survivors, and Matt Ford was a predator. A true fighter for victims would have done everything in their power to stop Matt Ford from abusing again. Now, here's what I need you to understand. When Daniel came forward publicly earlier this year, I sent those 2008 emails on March 16th to Patricia's board. They had those emails in their hands throughout this entire investigation. But when Patricia's board issued their statement, they addressed 2001, where there's no paper trail, and they said Patricia doesn't remember anything about the abuse. They said nothing, not one word about the 2008 emails, emails that were sitting right in front of them, emails in which Daniel explicitly describes being sexually abused. These are not unintelligent people, which makes me believe that the decision not to address the 2008 emails was deliberate. And it was deliberate because they're damning. They're damned if they acknowledge the emails, because then people want to know why they didn't act in 2008 when a predator was working with youth. And they're damned if they ignore them, because ignoring them while conducting an investigation into the very allegation those emails described is not honest. They chose to ignore them, and they simply hoped that we wouldn't notice. Guess what? We did. Daniel's victim impact statement makes it clear that this has cost him a lot. Decades of alcohol abuse, an anxiety disorder, a nervous breakdown, years of inability to work at full capacity, tens of thousands of dollars in therapy, damaged family relationships, groomed away from his own family by the man Patricia's team was warned about and chose to keep him in their ministry, at least temporarily. Daniel's not doing well. And a significant part of why he is not doing well is that people who had the power to stop Matthew Ford in 2001 and again in 2008 chose their ministry's reputation over his safety, comfort over courage. 20 years ago, Patricia King Ministries could have blown the whistle on Matt Ford. They could have protected people. They chose not to. And it's likely that people were harmed. And today, faced with an opportunity to acknowledge that failure, to say, "We received those emails, we should have acted, we are sorry," they chose instead to say nothing. And that silence is not neutral. That silence is its own answer. Now I'm asking Patricia King Ministries to do what the Kingdom Accountability Project, the document that she and I helped write together, which is still displayed on her website, requires them to do. Be transparent, be honest, acknowledge what you knew and when you knew it. Not for me, not for your reputation, but for Kat and for Daniel and for thousands of survivors who are watching, for every person who has believed that you are a champion for survivors. It's just very difficult to believe that both Kat and Daniel are coming forward today and they're lying. I don't believe that. I believe their testimonies. But honestly, that is not what this video is ultimately about. It's about exposing cover-up culture. The verdict I want to leave you with is regarding how Patricia King Ministries handled this, and the record speaks for itself. They minimized Patricia's relationship with Kat, stripping her of her name and reducing 6 years to briefly. They didn't follow the CAP document, the one they endorsed and is still displayed on their website. When pressed on what they knew, they claimed they couldn't recall. They never addressed the 2008 emails that were sitting right in front of them. And it appears that they were dishonest about Patricia's involvement in LifeWave and then scrubbed the internet of videos that would contradict them. I could go on about the inconsistencies and the irregularities, but I want to bring this to a close. In the end, they chose silence over transparency, cover up over accountability, and that is my verdict. All proceeds from SpeakUp go toward counseling for survivors, and every like, share, and subscription to this channel generates matching funds up to $25,000. For more information on the matching fund, just go to roncantor.com/survivors. Thank you.